On the surface, Kimberly Hill's life looked ordinary, even admirable. A proud Marine Corps veteran, a dedicated hospice caregiver, and above all, a loving mother. But behind the closed doors of a modest apartment in Corpus Christi, Texas, a darkness was quietly growing, one that no one around her could have fully imagined. In March of 2014, just one day before her 51st birthday, Kimberly's life came to a brutal and shocking end. The person responsible wasn't a stranger, nor an enemy. It was the one she trusted most, her own son, 18-year-old Kevin Davis. What unfolded in that apartment was not just a murder, but an act so disturbing that even seasoned detectives struggled to process it. On March 27, 2014, police officers responded to a call at an apartment complex in Corpus Christi, Texas. When the police arrived, a maintenance worker provided them with a key. As soon as the police opened the door, their eyes fell on a large, dark stain on the carpet, a trail of blood that stretched from the leather sofa in the living room down the hallway. Before touching or photographing anything, they surveyed the apartment to grasp the scene. The crimson trail eventually led to a bedroom. There, right at the doorway, lay the half-naked body of Kimberly Hill. Beside her head rested a hammer with a blood-soaked wooden handle. It was immediately evident she was dead. The cause unmistakable, from the massive wound to the back of her skull and the fragments of brain tissue scattered across the floor. Detectives documented everything carefully. A pink hoodie, drenched in blood, left on the sofa, a hairband with blood caught in it, and a pink cell phone lying nearby. Bloodstains marked the hallway, the bathroom sink, and the kitchen counter, yet the most disturbing finds were several handwritten notes left by the killer. One message addressed directly to the police read, "Catch me and sorry for the mess." More troubling was a second note found at the apartment entrance. It read, "Don't lose your head. She might still survive. Though I doubt it. Hurry up. Desiree." Desiree was Kimberly Hill's 23-year-old daughter. Who could commit such an act? And why was the killer now invoking the name of Kimberly's daughter? Kimberly Hill was born on March 28, 1963, in Oklahoma. She was a devoted and selfless mother, as well as a proud corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps, where she served her country for 10 years. In 1990, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Desiree Danielle Hill. After Desiree's arrival, Kimberly chose not to return to active duty and instead took a civilian job. In 1995, she welcomed her second child, a son named Kevin Davis. Kevin's father was never involved in his life, leaving Kimberly to shoulder the responsibility of raising him on her own. By 2014, Kimberly and Kevin were living together in an apartment complex in Corpus Christi, Texas. While Desiree had already moved out and was living with her boyfriend, Kimberly was known as a loving, compassionate woman, traits that carried into her work as a hospice caregiver. But just 1 day before what would have been her 51st birthday, on March 27, 2014, Kimberly's life was brutally cut short in her own home. That same morning, at around 10 o'clock a.m., Timothy and Wanda, a middle-aged couple, were enjoying their morning coffee when their doorbell rang. Wanda peeked through the window and saw a young man on their porch. He motioned for her to step outside. Sensing her hesitation, Timothy set down his mug, walked to the door, and opened it. Standing before them was a thin, awkward-looking young man with a faint mustache and wireframe glasses, giving the impression of someone who spent most of his time behind a computer screen. He seemed harmless, even timid, but within moments of speaking, Wanda and Timothy were stunned. The man's words left them speechless. Timothy tried to ask a few questions, but the stranger's answers were vague, unsettling. While her husband spoke with the visitor, Wanda quietly stepped into another room and dialed 911. When squad cars finally pulled up, lights flashing, several armed officers leapt out, weapons drawn. They ordered the man to raise his hands. He complied, was forced to the ground, handcuffed, and placed into a cruiser. After the patrol cars drove away, Timothy and Wanda sat in stunned silence on their couch, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. A stranger had come to their doorstep, asking them to call 911. He wanted to turn himself in, confessing that he had just committed an unthinkable crime. He had taken the life of his own mother. Kimberly Hill, 23-year-old Desiree, was brought into the interrogation room. The moment officers told her the truth, Desiree slammed her hand on the table and let out a piercing scream. She shot up from her chair, pacing the room, unable to process the horror. She had been out of town and had no idea of the attack that had unfolded back home. After the initial shock, Desiree collapsed into her chair, then sprang up again. Rushing into the arms of her boyfriend, who was also present, she gasped for breath, hovering between fainting and breaking down into sobs. Her mother had been murdered just 1 day before what should have been her 51st birthday. It took several agonizing minutes before Desiree could collect herself enough to answer questions, realizing that every word she gave the detectives could be crucial. Investigators explained that the perpetrator had left several handwritten notes at the scene. One of them mentioned Desiree by name, raising immediate concerns for her safety. The autopsy of Kimberly Hill revealed catastrophic blunt force trauma to the head. The coroner reported that her skull had been split in two, with multiple ruptures concentrated on the right side of her brain. The blows were so severe that fragments of bone were tangled in her hair, and part of her brain matter had spilled out. The injuries were described as so extreme that the tissue resembled puree, as though mashed with a spoon. But the head wounds were not the only injuries. When detectives pressed for more detail about how the attack had been carried out, the explanation came not from the coroner, but from the perpetrator himself. Sitting in the interrogation room was a thin young man in a black t-shirt and wire-frame glasses. His posture was casual, his chin resting on his hand, his shoulders loose, completely unfazed. He calmly described how he had killed his 50-year-old mother. He admitted he had never had a girlfriend, but now, as he smirked to the stunned officers, he claimed he was no longer a virgin. At one point, he even winked, before pausing to describe his fantasies about committing the perfect crime. In these fantasies, he imagined himself dressed in a sharp suit, sneaking into a stranger's home. He would neutralize the homeowner first, then dress the lady of the house in a beautiful gown he had brought along. As a child, he said, strangling had always fascinated him, but after what he called his mistake with Kimberly, he thought next time he would use something sharper, more effective. He spoke of beheading a victim, then reattaching the head, because, as he explained chillingly, he preferred his women not only dead, but beautiful. His eyes gleamed with excitement as he laid out these gruesome fantasies. Everything about his tone suggested he wasn't just recounting one murder. He was revealing the mind of a serial killer in the making. Psychologists later analyzed his words, pointing out that the suit in his fantasy likely represented power and status, while dressing his victims was his way of asserting dominance and control over both their bodies and their identities. He confessed he had long fantasized about killing Kimberly and Desiree, and then desecrating their bodies, fantasies neither woman ever knew about. Kevin Davis was born on December 27, 1995. He was Kimberly Hill's biological son and Desiree's half-brother. In the third letter addressed to his mother and his sister, he wrote that he was exhausted with life and had contemplated end his own life. Kevin said he had drafted the letter in advance, but then changed his mind and instead took his mother's life. Now, sitting in the interrogation room, the 18-year-old 10th grader showed no visible remorse. He remained calm, one hand on the armrest, the other propped under his chin. He answered questions in a conversational tone, occasionally gesturing, as if chatting rather than confessing to a brutal crime. During the interview, Kevin made statements that stunned the detectives. He claimed to love his mother, but in a way he described as different. He then admitted to committing acts after the killing that deeply unsettled everyone in the room. According to Kevin's account, that morning he had asked his mother if he could kill himself, saying he was bored with life. Kimberly, taken aback, tried to dissuade him, as any worried parent would. Kevin kept pushing, and Kimberly eventually told him that she could not control his decisions. She called her daughter and asked Desiree to come over. At that moment, Kevin later said, he saw his chance. He abandoned the plan to harm himself and, on impulse, decided to kill his mother instead. He sat down, sketched out a plan that named both Kimberly and Desiree. Imagine the sequence like a plot in a story, and then carried it out. Calmly, he described how the attack unfolded. Kimberly had been seated on the couch watching TV. He first attempted to strangle her by ripping the cord from his gaming console to use as a ligature, but when that failed, when she began to scream and struggle, he retrieved a hammer and struck her repeatedly on the back of the head, so many blows that her skull was shattered, believing she might still be alive because of sounds she made. Kevin dragged her to the bedroom and used a knife to inflict further wounds to the head to ensure she would not survive. After killing his mother, Kevin further desecrated her body. He left her partially undressed and arranged her in a provocative manner. He later admitted to intimate with the corpse. The officers noted this added an additional layer of depravity to the crime. Kevin also confessed to earlier troubling behavior involving the family's gray cat. He said he had killed the animal out of boredom and described disturbing interactions with the carcass. Investigators treated these admissions as evidence of escalating, deviant behavior. When detectives tried to pin down precise details, was Kimberly already dead when he moved her to the bedroom? Kevin's answers were chillingly casual. He told them she was making snoring-like noises, which he took as a sign she might still be alive. He then said he took a steak knife from the kitchen and began to probe the wound in her skull. The detective's task was to determine legal distinctions, whether the additional injuries occurred while she was alive or after death, because that would affect charges and aggravating circumstances relevant under Texas law. Kevin went on to describe his actions in chilling detail. He told detectives that after striking his mother, he wanted to explore what he had done, describing the sensation in grotesque terms. He even compared parts of the experience to the texture of putty or pudding. The officers listened in disbelief, recording his words carefully for the case file. When asked if he regretted what he had done, Kevin admitted he understood why people would find his behavior horrifying, but he bluntly said he would not take it back. He described Kimberly as a wonderful mother who did not deserve such a death, then coldly shifted the blame back onto himself. He called himself a cruel, disgusting person, aware that he was the problem. Investigators also discovered that Kevin's plans had not stopped with his mother. He had originally intended to kill his sister, Desiree, as well. Instead, after murdering Kimberly, he chose to torment Desiree psychologically. He left her a note suggesting their mother might still be alive. Fully aware that Kimberly was already dead, he admitted he wanted to cause Desiree anguish, knowing her sensitive nature would make the message devastating. Listening to Kevin's account, the detectives were struck by his detachment from reality. He insisted he was not insane and that he understood his actions perfectly well. By conventional standards, he admitted what he did was wrong, but he still confessed he enjoyed the act of taking a life and would like to do it again. He said that since he had turned himself in, he might as well be honest about his darkest fantasies. This raised the disturbing question: how could an 18-year-old, harboring such thoughts, live unnoticed in society? Kevin had attended school, but his mother sometimes confided to friends that she struggled with him. He disliked classes, preferred video games, and often isolated himself. Desiree later added that while Kevin never showed outward aggression toward people, he had been diagnosed with severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, a condition that made it difficult for him to focus, control impulses, or regulate emotions. The night before the murder, Desiree had spoken on the phone with her mother. Kimberly told her they had argued, sparked by an advertisement for a dating website. Something set Kevin off. He became disrespectful, said cruel things, and ultimately blurted out that he would not care if his mother or sister died. This is what caused Desiree to react violently in the interrogation room, flapping her hands, pacing back and forth, panting. It wasn't only grief for her mother's death. What truly crushed her was the revelation that her own brother was the killer. At that time, once she calmed down, Desiree told detectives that as a child, Kevin often drew disturbing pictures, people being shot, blood pooling on the floor, and dismembered bodies. Nobody understood where these images came from. He never physically hurt her, even when angry, but the drawings were a dark signal. Kevin himself later admitted that he had dropped hints about his violent fantasies for years, but people dismissed them. The family either overlooked or avoided confronting what might be wrong with him. Eventually, those fantasies consumed him. A simple household argument became the spark for murder. Investigators later concluded that one of the reasons Kevin did not attack Desiree was because she lived with her boyfriend, someone who could likely overpower him and stop the plan. Kevin, calculating in his own way, did not want to risk failure. The murder took place at around 8:00 a.m. After killing his mother, Kevin calmly took a shower to wash off the blood, then grabbed his bicycle and pedaled aimlessly through the city streets. At first, he thought about fleeing town, but he didn't have a real plan. He left behind several handwritten notes in the apartment, some aimed at the police, others deliberately meant to torment his sister Desiree. Kevin assumed she would be the first to discover Kimberly's body. He didn't anticipate that Kimberly's colleagues, alarmed by her absence from work, would be the ones to raise the alarm. As night fell, Kevin wandered the streets on his bike, zigzagging through neighborhoods without purpose. The cool night air sobered him, and he slowly realized his chances of escape were slim. Eventually, he abandoned the bicycle near some railroad tracks and began walking through a quiet, suburban neighborhood. By chance, he came upon the home of Timothy and Wanda. He knocked on their door and, with unnerving calm, told the couple he had killed someone and wanted them to call 911. Timothy, who had taken the day off from work, invited him onto the porch while Wanda discreetly phoned the authorities from another room. Kevin chatted as though this were an ordinary conversation, even describing his bike ride the night before. Timothy cautiously asked why he had done it. Kevin gave multiple answers, none of which were clear or convincing. Both homeowners were unsettled by his unusual composure. Wanda wondered if he might be under the influence of banned substances. But the longer he spoke, the clearer it became that his detachment was something far darker. Many later speculated that if Timothy had not been home that morning, the story might have ended differently. Kevin was physically small and seemed to avoid confrontation with men, but he often sought out those more vulnerable. Kimberly, his mother, had trusted him completely and never expected betrayal. Wanda, petite and alone, might have been another potential victim had she answered the door by herself. During interrogation, Kevin admitted that he had been wrestling with these dark urges since the age of 10. Unlike many violent offenders, He didn't claim a traumatic or abusive upbringing. On the contrary, he insisted his mother was loving, supportive, and the best mum. This paradox, murdering the very person he claimed to adore, made the crime even more baffling. In Kimberly's bedroom, investigators discovered a telling artifact, a small photo frame, but instead of a picture, she had placed a handwritten note from Kevin inside it. Kimberly had cherished the message so much that she chose to display it as a keepsake. The contrast between that tender gesture and the brutality of her death was devastating. Detectives also searched Kevin's computer. What they found was deeply troubling. His browsing history included searches for torture and violent fantasies involving corpses. He had even saved disturbing images and videos in a separate folder, further underscoring the depth of his obsessions. Kevin did not expect sympathy or forgiveness. He told investigators he was prepared to spend his life in prison and even suggested that a sentence of 100 years would be fitting. At one point, prosecutors offered him a plea deal, 60 years in prison. Kevin rejected it. A psychiatric evaluation later diagnosed him with a personality disorder, but declared him legally sane. The experts concluded that Kevin understood right from wrong when he killed his mother, meaning there was no clinical explanation to shield him from responsibility. During the trial, the jury was shown a recording of the interrogation where the defendant confessed to arguably the most heinous crime one could commit against their own mother. When the video ended, Kevin turned in his chair to face the members of the jury and gave them a wide smile. During her testimony at the trial, Desiree told her brother about her feelings. The whole time, he just shrugged and sighed dramatically, as if listening to a lecture from his older sister about bad behavior. Kimberly's father, Kevin's grandfather, said that his grandson had taken the life of the only person who supported him, and now he would be left all alone. In response, Kevin merely cracked his knuckles and smiled. When witnesses spoke, Kevin waved at them and smiled warmly, as if the case wasn't about him at all. It took the jury less than an hour to reach their verdict. Kevin Davis was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. He is being held in a facility that focuses on the mental health of prisoners. Many people condemn Kevin's crime, but some blame Kimberly. In their view, when her son told her he wanted to kill himself, she did nothing to stop him. They believe that was the cause of the crime. It's strange that some don't see the cause in Kevin himself and fail to understand that he embodies true evil. But can prison reform a person who raised a hand against his own mother?
Georgina Kruger was born on April 11, 1992 in Munich. Georgina, often called Jorodzina, was the middle child in a simple household. She had an older brother named Tommy, who was 8 years her senior, and a younger sister named Michelle, who was 2.5 years younger. When Jorodzina turned 11, her parents decided to divorce. Tommy then chose to live with their father at age 19. After the separation, Jorodzina and Michelle were primarily raised by their mother, Vesna, and maternal grandmother. Both girls excelled academically and participated in music and dance activities, displaying distinct creativity. The family lived modestly. Although their father stayed in touch with his ex-wife and daughters, his focus largely remained on supporting his elder son through educational pursuits and other endeavors. In June 2006, Vesna relocated with her mother and daughters to Berlin after securing a well-paying job there. They moved into Moabit district at house number 8 on Stendal Street. On September 1st that year, both sisters enrolled at one of the best local schools, accessible by bus, despite being situated in another district. Vesna adapted well to her new job and had ambitious plans for their future until unforeseen events disrupted their peaceful existence abruptly. From an early age, Jorodzina harbored a dream of becoming an actress. She loved to sing and dance, dedicating herself wholeheartedly and taking these pursuits very seriously. Inspired by Indian films, she envisioned a career in acting and enthusiastically participated in school theater, attending acting and stage speech courses. Her teachers recognized her talent, forecasting future success and fame for her. Furthermore, Georgina possessed a bright, expressive appearance, characterized by a slender feminine figure and notable height for her age. She meticulously cared for herself, keeping abreast of fashion trends and striving to dress stylishly. Georgina skillfully applied decorative cosmetics, remarkably well, akin to professional makeup artists. Often back in Munich, she would apply makeup for friends and neighbors with precision. During the summer holidays in Berlin, Georgina actively attended various casting calls in attempts to make her breakthrough onto the big screen or television. Though she managed to appear in crowd scenes several times, these roles were quite minor. However, on Friday, September 22, 2006, fortune finally favored her. Georgina auditioned for a guest role in the television series Turkish for Beginners, and her candidacy was approved. She was scheduled to receive a callback on Monday, September 25th, to finalize her inclusion in the cast. This callback was set to discuss further details and extend an invitation for contract signing. Georgina, the new beauty in town, made a noticeable impact from her very first day at her new school. She immediately captured the attention of all the boys in her class. However, when it came to interacting with the girls, she faced significant challenges. They openly envied her and saw her as a competitor. As a result, her classmates were slow to welcome her into their group and often communicated with her reluctantly. Despite these obstacles, Georgina remained sociable, friendly, and approachable. She avoided conflicts and tried hard to interact with everyone in the class. This teenage girl wasn't just beautiful. She danced well, sang wonderfully, and even received an offer from a modeling agency to become a photo model. She agreed to the offer, but unfortunately missed the planned photo session scheduled for early October. Georgina harbored dreams of making it big in Hollywood or Bollywood one day. She envisioned herself walking on the red carpets of prestigious film festivals amidst celebrities, dreaming of fame, recognition, and film awards. To achieve these aspirations, she was prepared to work diligently on herself. Just as these dreams seemed within reach, Georgina suddenly disappeared without a trace a few miles from home. At that time, she was awaiting confirmation for a role in a TV series and had no doubts about securing it. Throughout that weekend, Georgina could think of nothing else but the anticipated call from the studio that would decide her future. She was filled with excitement and inspiration, already imagining herself on set, preparing for her lines. On Monday morning, September 25th, as usual, she headed to school. She was expected back home by 2 p.m., and since the call was expected later that afternoon, Georgina asked her grandmother to answer all calls in her absence. The day felt endlessly long for Kruger. Georgina's classmates noticed she kept checking the time and seemed unable to focus on her lessons. Given that she had told no one about her casting opportunity, everyone interpreted her anxious state differently. After school ended for the day, Georgina gathered her belongings swiftly and rushed to the nearest bus stop. She boarded bus number 27, which she rode daily, and headed towards home. After traveling 3 stops, she got off at Rue Rov, not far from where she lived. Georgina Kruger never made it home. Vanishing somewhere halfway from the bus stop to her apartment, she was never seen again, neither alive nor deceased. By 2 in the afternoon, her grandmother, who was waiting for Georgina and her sister, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgina was expected first, with Michelle arriving a bit later due to extra classes at music school. It was strange when Georgina did not show up because she had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3, the grandmother grew anxious and began calling Georgina, only to find her phone turned off. Subsequent attempts also failed. Anxiety grew further as more time passed. When Georgina's mother returned from work and learned about her daughter's disappearance and unreachable mobile phone, she immediately sensed that something serious had occurred. The first step was contacting the school, where it was confirmed that Georgina had attended all her classes and left by bus as usual. The mother then reached out to several of Georgina's friends, hoping that she might have been delayed talking or stopping at a cafe on her way home. However, all friends confirmed that Georgina appeared in a hurry and headed straight home. Increasingly concerned, they proceeded to the police station and reported the disappearance of the 14-year-old girl. Initially skeptical, law enforcement suspected that Georgina might have gone on a date or visited friends or perhaps argued with a classmate and was sulking alone somewhere. Exhausting all possible scenarios and verifying that the teenager wasn't found in any anticipated locations, detectives then began checking accident reports and calling hospitals, assuming she might have encountered trouble on her way home from school. Yet there were no hospital records for Georgina either. As night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews commenced. It turned out that the last sighting of Georgina was at the bus stop. When she got off the bus and turned the street leading to her home, the schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap containing her notebooks, textbooks, and mobile phone. Investigators tracked the girl's movements through her device's signal. She spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. However, approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly vanished and never reappeared. The search began on Stendhal Street, where the Kruger family lived. A search team with dogs trained to detect both living and deceased humans was dispatched there. At that point, there was still hope of finding the teenage girl alive and unharmed. Law enforcement checked every home, interviewed all residents and potential witnesses, inspected attics and basements, and spoke with workers at local stores and cafes. No one had seen Georgina. Even dogs couldn't pick up her trail. By the next morning, flyers with the schoolgirl's photo and requests for any information about her were posted all over the city. Dozens of calls came into the police station, reporting sightings of a similarly looking girl in different parts of the city. Unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. Investigators also began to follow up on all previously convicted local residents, as well as those released on bail. Special attention was given to criminals who had shown an unhealthy interest in minors. However, all these efforts yielded no results. The schoolgirl seemed to have vanished into thin air, not making it home. No traces or personal belongings found, as if she had never existed at all. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was suspended due to lack of leads, not a single clue, and no direction left to pursue. About a year after Georgina disappeared, someone called the police anonymously. The caller said her body was at the bottom of a nearby lake. Law enforcement couldn't figure out who made the call, but they decided to check it out anyway. For weeks, skilled divers went through the lake with advanced equipment. They were thorough, examining almost every inch of the lake bed. They found nothing. It was a false lead. Despite this, it got the public interested in the case again. The media began discussing and writing about Georgina's disappearance once more. So another search operation was set up. The police talked to neighbors again and brought in search dogs, although hopes were low since the dogs had not picked up her scent on the day she vanished. A year later, investigators were fairly sure Georgina was no longer alive. However, her family didn't believe it. Her mother made up a story for herself that her daughter had run away to India and was now in Bollywood films, dancing and singing as she always wanted to. These thoughts comforted her mother and helped her carry on for the sake of her younger daughter. Efforts to find Georgina resumed from time to time. In 2016, nearly 10 years after she vanished, a resident of Stendhal Street contacted police about a troubling neighbor who invited underage girls over regularly. This neighbor was a 35-year-old Turkish immigrant named Ali K. Publicly, Ali K appeared to be an exemplary family man. He was married and raising 3 kids. But closer investigation worried police officers as they delved into his background and personality. 4 years earlier, he had already been under suspicion and investigated by authorities due to concerning behavior patterns. At that time, he deceitfully lured a local schoolgirl by promising to sell her a trendy smartphone at a symbolic price. He took the girl to his storeroom, located in the basement of the apartment building. There, he struck her on the head and coerced her into intimate closeness. Afterward, he made the teenager swear she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened. He then her a paper napkin to wipe her tears and helped her tidy up before leaving. The girl promised to remain silent, just to escape from his clutches. But as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident, and together, they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl detailed the man's storeroom in the basement, noting that it looked more like a maniac's den. Ali was arrested that same day, but vehemently denied his guilt and shared his own version of the events. According to him, he was indeed selling the gadget, and the girl herself expressed a desire to buy it. As the smartphone was in his basement storeroom, they went down together. When the guest examined the device, she said that she had always dreamed of such a gadget, but since she didn't have the money, she was ready to pay in another way. Following this, according to Ali, the girl began kissing him and started undressing. He tried reasoning with her, but ended up pushing her away forcefully, causing her to fall and hit her head. This explained the injury and bruises on her body. However, the fact of intimate closeness could not be proven, as Ali had used a contraceptive, which he later disposed of. Ali's wife Melik fully supported her husband and also began accusing the girl of indecent behavior and attempts to seduce her husband. Ultimately, Ali received only a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. Nonetheless, as soon as the police took up investigation into the disappearance of Kruger again, they decided to check him thoroughly once more. Ali K. did not have a permanent job and got by on odd jobs, mainly living on benefits. He loved gambling and often incurred debts. Being a regular visitor at a Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building allowed him to make acquaintances who treated him to food and drinks. Despite his precarious lifestyle, Ali carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years, wearing fashionable clothes even if it meant spending children's benefits on them. The main oddity about Ali K. was his attraction to young girls, which raised several flags during this renewed investigation into Kruger's disappearance. To ensure that the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in. He posed as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Moabit area to open a car service station. A few times, he visited the cafe in Ali's building, loudly discussing business plans and details with a partner. As they left, the partner mentioned the need to find a manager soon, noting that it was a well-paying position and that it was important to choose wisely. After these words, the second man left, while Hakan stayed to finish his coffee. Suddenly, Ali approached and sat at his table. He immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat. The businessman noted that Ali might fit the role and then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began communicating regularly. Their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had an unexpected effect. As the suspect tried to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer, he boasted of his achievements, even minor ones, and preferred to stay silent about any wrongful acts. Several months later, realizing that the case was not progressing, the investigation decided to introduce another agent, this time a woman who would play Hakan's girlfriend. This introduced Susan into the scenario. Her goal was to befriend Ali's wife Melik and try uncover any secrets her husband might be keeping. It only took a few meetings for them all to get along well, after which all four started socializing as families. Melik was sociable, but regarded her husband as nearly a saint. For years, she had turned a blind eye to his infidelities, did not believe the schoolgirl who accused him of violence, and remained convinced her husband was simply unlucky with jobs, despite being a very good person in her eyes. But now, everything would change soon. Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed he was incapable of harming. The agents decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that progress had been made in the Crew case, and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind, quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then, indifferently, put the paper aside. It became clear that Melik knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The K family had become friends with the agents, even trusting them to look after their children. But no confessions were forthcoming. Ali strived to appear honest and upright, and his wife was simply unaware of the crime her husband had committed. Maintaining their cover was becoming increasingly expensive. They even had to lease a space for the supposed auto repair shop and sign a sham employment contract with Ali to avoid raising his suspicions. The investigation then took a desperate last step by introducing another agent who would play a villainous role. According to the backstory, his name was Kor. He was Hakan's cousin, had a criminal record, and was running some underground business. The hope was that Ali, meeting a kindred spirit, would open up and confess his sins. The men quickly bonded over their shared interests. Kor treated his new friend to drinks, and together they visited various clubs and houses of ill repute. The new friend confessed that he made money through not entirely legal means and thus wanted to spend it indulgently, with Ali willingly helping him in this endeavor. Simultaneously, Kor constantly complained about his girlfriend, with whom he supposedly could not break up because she was blackmailing him and threatening to report his illegal business to the police. According to him, she was constantly demanding money, and her needs were growing. One day, while having drinks with a friend, Kor declared that he intended to rid himself of the bothersome blackmailing girlfriend in a radical way and was willing to pay 100,000 euros to anyone who would do the work. Ali perked up at this and offered to take on the task himself. His friend agreed but suggested they discuss the details in a secluded place when sober. In November 2017, during a monstrous confession while sitting in a car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate Kor's nuisance girlfriend. At one point, Kor doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken someone's life with his bare hands. Ali stated that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street and completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as attractive and felt intense desire for her. One warm September day, when the girl was returning from school and the street was unusually quiet and deserted, Ali saw his chance. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move some items from his storage area, and she kindly agreed, not sensing any danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and tried to kiss the schoolgirl who struggled and screamed. He then knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head and took advantage of her. After the incident, afraid she might report him to the police, he decided not to let her go. He grabbed her throat with his hands and squeezed as hard as he could. Ali described this process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days. If the search team had looked into his storage area during this time, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator, but no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down. He wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Kora's car. By the evening of that same day, he was taken into Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste at the landfill was regularly incinerated. Her body was essentially cremated. The trial and verdict. The hearings in this case lasted another 2.5 years before a final verdict was delivered. The criminal adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he had fabricated the entire story to gain Cora's trust. In reality, he planned to rescue his girlfriend by turning in his friend to the police as soon as he received the money. No additional evidence was found besides the criminal's own confession. However, his detailed and vivid account was enough to convince the jury of his guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Djordjiena's disappearance, Ali K was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of ever being released. His wife Malik never believed in her husband's guilt, convinced that he had implicated himself while pursuing a noble cause. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This harrowing tale unfolded in North America, with Mexico City as its backdrop. The central figure in this story is Alejandra Lafuente, a resident of Mexico City. Alejandra is described as having striking brunette hair with bright brown eyes that highlight her thick, black lashes. She had a fit and athletic build, which she diligently maintained through fitness routines, yoga, and breathing exercises. Alejandra took great pride in her appearance and loved self-care rituals. Frequent visits to beauty salons, massage sessions, and spas showcased her commitment to personal upkeep. During warm weather, she could be found lounging on the beach while engaging in scientific work. On cloudy days, she often visited tanning salons. It's safe to say that Alejandra had a strong sense of self-love and viewed herself as an epitome of feminine beauty. Career-wise, Alejandra also exhibited ambition and determination not to lag behind others' successes. Her father is Dr. Alberto Dente, an esteemed psychiatrist well known for his research into mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and manic disorders. Notably revered for both his scientific contributions and experiments with patients, which many view as groundbreaking, Dr. Dente's achievements set high standards for Alejandra, who aspired to attain similar levels of success. She pursued a similar path as her father. To achieve this, she enrolled at one of the top universities for psychiatry and graduated with honors. Her perseverance, resourcefulness, and extraordinary intelligence, along with her father's connections, greatly assisted her in writing and defending her thesis on manic syndrome. However, Alejandra did not later engage in psychiatry. She became drawn to the field of psychotherapy instead. With the financial support from her father, the young professional obtained a license and set up her own practice in a new business center located in the heart of the capital city. There was no shortage of clients, but Alejandra decided to focus solely on women. Women struggling with eating disorders, depression, relationship issues, and low self-esteem sought her counseling services. Alejandra worked diligently to help solve family problems. Yet, despite her professional success, her personal life was less fulfilling. Alejandra's first marriage ended in divorce. She had two charming girls who inherited their mother's eyes and their father's sense of humor. Despite the failed marriage, Alejandra was not discouraged. To her, having two children was not a reason to neglect herself or give up on finding happiness again. She still aspired to meet a man who could be both an ideal partner for her and a good father figure for her daughters. Sometime after their separation, Alejandra's ex-husband would visit their home on weekends to spend time with their daughters and assist Alejandra with household chores if necessary. These visits had become routine for the couple. On one such visit, Alejandra asked him to enter through the backyard because she claimed that the lock on the front door was jammed. The man entered as requested. Alejandra told him that their youngest daughter was bathing and asked him to join them in the bathroom without suspecting anything amiss. The man entered the bathroom and saw tape on the floor. Where was his daughter? The bathtub was filled, but no one. Suddenly, right at that very second, he sensed something was terribly wrong. His ex-wife stood behind him with a hammer in her hand. She struck him on the head with all her might, then delivered another blow. He fell instantly. A gaping hole in his skull poured blood everywhere. Later, experts determined the man had no chance to save himself. Death came almost immediately after the first blow from the heavy weapon. His eldest daughter, who unexpectedly returned early from a friend's house, witnessed this truly horrifying scene. Alejandra, it was determined, suffered from severe mental distress. She frequently directed her anger toward friends and even her husband, leaving visible scratches on his arms and neck. Housemates constantly witnessed her tantrums over seemingly nothing and erratic behavior. This time, things went out of control. The eldest daughter ran out of the house screaming for help instantly, and a neighbor rushed over to call the police squad. Alejandra was arrested and charged with murder by professionals at the station and placed in a cell where she stayed for a month until her first hearing. At trial, Alejandra denied any guilt. Her lawyers argued self-defense. According to them, her ex-husband was intensely jealous of Alejandra and falsely accused her of bringing men into the house, delusions that could affect their little girl's psyche negatively. She said that he showed up unexpectedly at his ex-wife's house, sneaking through the back door to catch her with another man. When he found Alejandra in the bathroom, he allegedly pounced on her and she had to defend herself, resulting in 2 blows to his head. On June 14, 2012, the sentence was handed down. Considering the evidence presented by the defense and the presence of 2 minor children, Alejandra was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months. Thanks to the coordinated work of lawyers and the financial support of her father, the term bars was replaced with a suspended sentence. A couple of months later, an appeal was filed again with a request to drop the charges with by. The argument is assault in self-defense. Human rights activists felt deep sympathy for Alejandra, portrayed at trial as a victim of domestic violence. As a result, the court reviewed the case anew and handed down an acquittal. Following her release, Alejandra continued her psychological counseling. She also maintained an image as a victim of gender inequality, fighting for her rights, just like many women in North America do. Ultimately, this portrayal made Alejandra even more popular among potential clients. Soon after, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera, a prominent Mexican businessman and son of Adrian Carrera Francis. Alan was tall and handsome with a statuesque stature. His father had been head of special services for the Central District and achieved considerable success in his career. Quickly, Alan expanded his business, creating a chain of construction stores that popped up all over the country. However, not all parts of Alan's business were above board. Some aspects were deeply entwined with criminal activities, which led to his father's removal from his position after one financial fraud incident was uncovered. Additionally, Alan had ties with a criminal group engaged in transporting psychotropic substances to the United States. The base for this illicit operation was located in a border town and guarded by bribed police officers. This group controlled a significant portion of psychoactive substance trafficking in the South. Evidence finally tied Alan's father to these illegal activities. Under pressure during interrogation, he gave a statement implicating himself and faced a potential 20-year prison sentence due to these revelations. On July 18, 2000, Adrian Carrera was released early. Following his release, he dedicated all his time to his son and legitimate business. His son grew up quickly, adopting his father's views and experiences. After graduating from college, Alan Carrera decided to follow in his father's footsteps and Alan showed a keen interest in a household appliance store. Despite his young age, he managed it entirely on his own. While it wasn't as large as his father's enterprise, it generated substantial revenue. Alan was always surrounded by many admirers, but he had been in love with a classmate since childhood and eventually married her. She was intelligent, beautiful, and from a respectable family. Their marriage was brief yet eventful. They had a lovely daughter together. However, the demands of work and Alan's frequent absences led to their divorce. The separation was extremely difficult for him, as he had loved her since high school. Subsequent relationships failed to bring him joy, leading to feelings of loneliness and sadness that resulted in excessive drinking. Alan developed a harmful habit as he tried various ways to cope with his prolonged depression and affinity for alcohol, attending meetings. Eventually, fate brought him to renowned psychiatrist Dr. Alberto. Interestingly enough, Dr. Alberto was the father of Maria Alejandra, Alan's ex-wife, who was also navigating through a challenging divorce herself. Despite their separation, she couldn't allow herself to be close to anyone else either. Maria Alejandra also sought counseling from a therapist. However, Dr. Alberto explained that ethically he could not treat both her and Alan simultaneously. He recommended she see another professional therapist without disclosing that this therapist would be Alejandra, his daughter. He was described as a pleasant man and quite wealthy. Without much thought, Alejandra asked her client to bring her ex-husband for another consultation. According to the therapist, she could resolve their issue in a single session and break the strong bond between the former spouses. From the first moments of the confidential session, Alejandra began implementing her plan to seduce the entrepreneur. The results were immediate. Right after the session, Alan invited the therapist for a cup of coffee to discuss family problems. Quite rapidly, an affair developed between them. Soon enough, Alan's ex-wife discovered their relationship and was shocked. She even considered reporting the incident to the doctor's ethics committee, but ultimately did not. Alejandra, being a very competent specialist, managed to convince her client to let go of her jealousy and move on from her former spouse. As a result, Alan's ex-wife decided not to file any complaints and discontinued their sessions. Meanwhile, Alan and Alejandra's relationship progressed quickly. A few months after their first date, they decided to move in together. 2 months later, they decided to formalize their relationship. However, Alan had no inkling of his fiancée's hidden secrets or the reasons behind her divorce from her ex-husband. In April 2014, Alan decided to visit his parents over a weekend and used the opportunity to talk about his beloved and their upcoming wedding. Alan's parents were extremely surprised by this news so late in the process. They had never heard of Alejandra before, which struck them as very unusual. A week after meeting with his parents, Alan and Alejandra registered their marriage. Interestingly though, Alejandra asked her husband not to invite friends and relatives. No invitations were sent out at all. The wedding was intended to be modest due to budget constraints, which did not permit inviting everyone they would have liked. However, as it turned out later, the bride's father did attend the marriage ceremony. Initially, the young couple's life seemed like a fairy tale, full of happiness and numerous plans and desires. But this didn't last long. Alejandra couldn't conceal her hysterical character, which foreshadowed the horrifying conclusion of this story that no one anticipated. The relationship between the newlyweds began to change dramatically. Alan was a rather secretive person and didn't share details of his personal life with friends. Consequently, little was known about what happened behind their closed doors. Nonetheless, it became evident that their former relationship had developed significant cracks, and the couple no longer appeared as happy as they once were. After meeting Alejandra, Alan distanced himself from his family. The final quarrel was the wedding to which his parents were not invited. After this event, they even ceased calling each other. Alan's remaining friends noticed that his spouse grew increasingly nervous and sometimes behaved inadequately, quickly losing her temper. Following a few such incidents, Alan felt deeply ashamed and decided to minimize joint meetings. Quarrels in the family occurred daily and were almost always unfounded. One evening, according to her own testimony, Alejandra decided to go through her husband's cell phone and discovered correspondences with several women containing inappropriate content. Understandably, it was impossible for her to ignore such things. Alejandra reported in court that her husband beat her, insulted her, and humiliated her in every possible way. When she discovered his infidelity as well, saving the marriage seemed pointless. For reasons unknown, Alejandra did not pursue traditional methods of psychotherapy to try and salvage the relationship. Instead, consumed by thoughts of her husband's cheating, she resolved to deal with Alan using a method already familiar to her. Once she made this decision, all her attention focused on devising a perfect murder plan. While Alan went about his regular, measured routine, he remained oblivious to the looming events. He communicated infrequently with his family. However, he couldn't ignore the annual feast celebrating his grandfather's birthday. As expected, Alan attended the event. Nevertheless, his parents made it clear that his wife wasn't welcome in their home. This situation upset Alejandra and worsened the couple's relationship. On October 31, 2014, Alan's phone last sent a text confirming he had arrived home safely after the party. From that moment on, his absence extended to his work too. This was highly unusual because Alan was known for his dedication to work. He hadn't missed work before, especially with an important store launch approaching where his presence was crucial. The cause of this sudden disappearance lay in Alejandra's horrifying plan executed after Alan's return from the celebration. Following a fierce argument, she spiked his milk with a powerful sleeping pill before suffocating him with a pillow. Alejandra watched as Alan struggled unsuccessfully to remove the pillow and catch his breath. After that, Alejandra dragged Alan's body to their neighbor's garden to retrieve an electric saw. Bearing a grim smile, she dismembered her husband's body into pieces. She then bagged the remains and ensured no identifying features remained by removing fingers and teeth. It was these details that would help the investigation in identifying the individual if the body was discovered. Alejandra packed all the bags into suitcases to transport the corpse out of the house without drawing suspicion. However, she did not succeed. As dawn approached, Alejandra could not leave the house with the suitcase unnoticed. An elderly neighbor who suffered from insomnia watched her from her window. She found the young woman's early departure and strange behavior. Additionally, for some reason, Alejandra's husband did not help lift the heavier suitcases, which added to her strange behavior as she continually looked around. At dawn, Alejandra returned home, which further surprised the vigilant neighbor. As it later turned out, Alejandra had scattered bags containing her ex-husband's remains across different neighborhoods to cover her tracks. The following day, she resumed her normal life. On November 6, 2014, police officers in Mexico City made a gruesome discovery. Human remains were found in a vacant lot near the city's outskirts. A few days later, bags containing arms and legs were located in various parts of the capital. The most chilling detail was the absence of fingers from these limbs. Teams of officers were quickly assembled and they methodically combed through the streets. Their primary objective was to locate the head and other missing parts of the victim and prevent further atrocities from occurring. Despite their efforts, the fingers and head were never found. However, by forensic experts, it was determined that all discovered remains belonged to the same individual. Sadly, without fingers or teeth, identifying this person proved impossible. To divert suspicion from herself, Alejandra began sending messages to Alan's relatives. Her aim was to avert suspicion. However, she only aggravated matters. Unbeknownst to her, Alan had recently distanced himself from his family and had no contact with his relatives. Alejandra informed Alan's parents that they were going on vacation and would be out of reach. This plan quickly unraveled when Alberto, Alejandra's father, began making phone calls to Alan's father's house. Alberto sought to find out if his son-in-law's family had any idea of Alejandra's whereabouts. He hadn't heard from her in some time, and the family was quite worried about missing their counseling sessions. Later, Alberto reached out to Alan's relatives again. This time, he informed them that his daughter had been located but had to be forcibly admitted to a clinic. She was suffering from depression due to her husband's infidelity. This news deeply alarmed the relatives, leading them to search for Alan without success. Subsequently, Alan's family turned to the police for help. Laboratory experts decided they needed to compare the remains recently discovered with Alan's characteristics. The resemblance was 100%. His relatives also identified him without a doubt. This was particularly hard on Alan's grandfather. Soon after the identification, he fell ill with heart disease, as Alan was his only grandson. The investigation team obtained a search warrant for Alan's home and office. they discovered a patch of freshly disturbed earth in the backyard. Upon digging, they found human fingers and teeth. Alejandra was immediately apprehended. More blood traces were found in one of the rooms, as well as on the trunk of a car and in the garage. Initially, Alejandra denied any involvement, hoping she could escape punishment as she reportedly had with her previous husband. However, investigators quickly pieced together the case. An elderly witness provided critical testimony. Her timeline matched Alan's estimated time of death. It came to light that Alejandra used her job to obtain a powerful sleeping pill, a medication typically accessible only to medical professionals, which further implicated her in the crime. The evidence linked Alejandra directly to her husband's brutal murder. CCTV footage corroborated that Alan had entered their house but never left. Additionally, this footage confirmed that suitcases were later removed from the house. On December 10, 2014, the jury delivered its verdict. Ale got life imprisonment for murder with cruelty and an attempt to hide it. Using her official position didn't help. Her father's connections and bribes couldn't save her either. All he managed was a closed trial, away from the public eye and the press. Sadly, he did it for his career. Now, hardly anyone will seek help from a specialist who raised such a ruthless monster and couldn't spot problems in his own daughter. During the trial, thoughts about the death of Alejandra's first husband popped up too. But the passage of time meant no evidence was found. There were even whispers about her father's involvement in what happened. People suspected he worked with her on these crimes out of some misguided scientific interest. Yet, no proof surfaced. After many appeals from the victim's side, her sentence changed to death. This is almost unheard of in Mexico today. Death sentences are super rare. Plus, she can't ask for a case review. Her house and property must go to the victim's family. Though, who can be comforted by that when their loved one is gone? Alejandra showed she was pragmatic and cruel. She had major mental health issues, although medical exams said otherwise. Influenced by her father and using her position, she executed her manic plans without fear. After her first crime went unpunished, which let her off the hook, Alejandra felt untouchable and kept doing evil things. Maybe Alan would still be alive if this dreadful woman hadn't been acquitted before. Don't you think justice needs to catch up faster? We can't let monsters roam free because of loopholes or failures in our system. Let's ensure people like Alejandra face consequences right away so they don't get a chance to continue their wicked ways. Hi friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Agnes Clavina. According to official figures, more than tens of millions of people go missing year-round the world. About a third them are found alive and unharmed. Nearly half are eventually discovered deceased due to accidents or murders. Approximately 2 million individuals vanish without a trace each year. These cases often remain unresolved for many years, with the individuals found neither alive nor dead. The story Agnes Clavina garnered attention in the fall of 2014. A young and very attractive woman who was enjoying an evening out at a club with friends seemed to vanish into thin air. Everyone who might have been involved appeared to evade any responsibility. However, in 2023, 9 years after the incident, the case took an unexpected turn. Agnes Clavina was born on July 8, 1984, in Latvia's capital city, Riga. She grew up in a typical family. Agnes was the youngest of 2 daughters. Her sister Greta was only a couple of years older, leading to a close and nearly inseparable bond between them. Their parents endeavored to provide both daughters with quality education and ample opportunities to pursue their dreams. Agnes emerged as a sociable, cheerful, and very active individual from an early age. She excelled academically, engaged in sports activities, and had a wide circle of friends. Her aspirations for the future included careers linked with tourism or entertainment, passions driven by her love for travel, and her knack for organizing perfect leisure time. Furthermore, Agnes possessed striking looks and an impressive physique that garnered considerable male attention and constant compliments from admirers vying for her notice. After high school graduation, Agnes worked temporarily in the service industry while attending language courses and studying to become a tourism manager. At age 20, she decided to leave her homeland and relocate to London, often referred to as the Foggy Albion. She believed relocating would open up more prospects and opportunities to develop her full potential and talents. In London, she sought to build on her ambition, fueled by greater professional opportunities and cultural experiences unavailable in Latvia. Her parents and older sister didn't oppose her decision. They supported her sincerely. Soon after the move, the beautiful blonde met a young man named Michael Mills. He was 8 years older than Agnes, had a good education, and owned a thriving business. Michael had opened a small movie theater and entertainment complex. He was considered very successful. Agnes and Michael quickly found common ground and began dating. Michael courted Agnes beautifully, giving her expensive gifts. They traveled together and made ambitious plans for their future. The couple seemed truly in love and happy. According to those close to Agnes, this was her first true love. She appeared radiant beside Michael and dreamed of becoming his lawful wife soon. In 2014, Agnes was offered a 3-month labor contract as an administrator at one of the largest, most popular nightclubs in Marbella, Spain. Naturally, this job implied moving temporarily to another country. However, the ambitious young woman didn't want to miss this opportunity at all. Michael couldn't leave everything behind to go with her because of his job, but he wasn't against her accepting the contract. For Agnes, it was a chance to try herself in a new field of activity, gain invaluable experience, and possibly develop further in this direction. Marbella is renowned as one of the most famous and attractive resorts on the Mediterranean coast. Vacationers from different parts of the world come here, mostly wealthy people, seeking fun and looking to spend money. One frequently encounters show business stars, as well as famous athletes and businessmen. Agnes, who has always been very sociable, enjoyed working in such an environment. Before moving, she visited her family in Latvia to inform them that she had signed a favorable employment contract for 3 months. She and Michael were planning their marriage. Dad, Mom, and her sister were genuinely happy for Agnes and wished her luck. At the end of May 2014, Agnes packed only the essentials for 1 season and went to work in sunny Spain. Her lover stayed in London, but they called each other daily and communicated via video link, sharing everything that was happening in their lives. Agnes actively maintained her profiles on various popular social networks. She posted daily photos, small videos, and stories. She garnered many followers who closely followed her activities and work. It was evident that Agnes was living an engaging and busy life that she enjoyed every day. After the end of her employment contract, she decided to remain in Spain for a couple more months. It was the beginning of the velvet season at the resort, which presented an opportunity to earn good money. She consulted her boyfriend about this decision. He supported her and promised to visit because they had missed each other. Agnes quickly secured a job as a hostess in a high-end restaurant and renewed her lease. Michael visited her in September as planned. They enjoyed their time together, planned their wedding, and chose a honeymoon destination. Less than a week later, Michael returned to London while Agnes continued working in Spain for another month. She planned to visit her relatives before flying back to England to reunite with her lover. Sadly, these plans were not destined to be fulfilled. On September 6th, Agnes went with friends to a popular nightclub on the Costa del Sol. A few hours earlier, she had informed her fiancé of her plans. He did not object to Agnes enjoying herself with friends. They had fun, took pictures together, which Agnes posted on her online profile that night. According to those who saw her on that fateful evening, she wore a stunning short dress and carried a tiny white clutch handbag. Toward morning, as the friends were preparing to go home, Agnes mentioned she planned to stay a little longer and then take a cab. She was always quite serious and responsible, and she hadn't had much to drink. So her companions saw no reason for concern at that moment. When the friends said goodbye and headed for the exit, Agnes was talking to a man who had bought her a cocktail and appeared eager to gain her favor. After that night, Agnes was never seen again. It seemed as though she had simply vanished into the crowded nightclub. No one could recall what time or with whom the blonde left the establishment or where she went afterward. The next day, Agnes did not show up at work. When attempts to contact her were made, it became clear that her phone was switched off. Concerned colleagues and friends were the first to raise the alarm, but found that the police were slow to respond to their report of a missing person. Toward evening, a worried Michael called Agnes's mother. He explained that he had been unable to reach his fiancée all day, a situation that had never occurred before. The following day, Agnes's parents and Michael jointly tried to contact the Spanish police to report her disappearance. However, they were informed that relatives had to file such a report in person for it to be considered. After hearing this, Michael and Agnes's family took the next flight to Marbella. In the end, the missing persons report was filed by them 5 days after Agnes disappeared without a trace. The first place checked was the apartment Agnes had rented. It appeared as though she had simply stepped out briefly and would return soon. Documents, money, and some expensive pieces of jewelry remained in place. The refrigerator was stocked with prepared food items, and on her bed lay several outfits from which she seemingly chose what she wore on her last night out. It became evident that Agnes hadn't returned home since going out with friends. Her phone was turned off. She left no posts on social media and did not respond to any messages. It wasn't until then that the police started looking into Agnes's disappearance, but unfortunately, precious time had already been lost. Friends and family of Agnes began putting up flyers around the city with her picture, asking for help in locating her. The media picked up the story. Her images featured on television news and made it to the front pages of local newspapers. The leads and clues emerged after police examined footage from CCTV cameras, both inside and outside the entertainment venue. However, there were issues because by then, all files had been erased. Authorities needed specialists and assistants to retrieve them. Their efforts weren't wasted because a camera at the exit to the parking lot showed Agnes around 6 a.m. leaving the club with a man, and it was clear this wasn't of her own accord. This last footage showing Agnes alive was scrutinized in detail. The closer experts looked, the more alarming it appeared. Agnes was being led by a large man, and it was evident she was walking under duress since he held her tightly by the waist. She appeared scared, attempted to break free several times, and spoke emotionally, but the man persistently directed her towards the parking lot, where he practically forced her into his Mercedes A63. When this large man pushed her into the car, another man was already inside while he moved towards the driver's seat. Agnes managed to open the car door trying to escape, but at that moment, a doorman nearby intervened as instructed by a gesture from the driver. The doorman pushed her back into the car before receiving an apparent cash reward from the driver for his assistance. Approximately 6 minutes after Agnes entered the vehicle, her phone was switched off and hasn't been turned on since then. Tracking further movement of the vehicle proved impossible due to lack of CCTV coverage along their route. It became obvious that these men were likely among those who last saw Agnes before she went missing. The case was shrouded in secrecy from the outset. Everyone involved in the investigation signed non-disclosure agreements, and information was tightly controlled. Not only was the press kept at bay, but even Agnes's loved ones received almost no updates. For the first few months, her parents and fiancé were left in the dark. They were simply told that an investigation was underway and that it's too early to draw any conclusions. Given that Agnes not communicated in this period, there was little hope she was still alive. Michael periodically gave interviews pleading for assistance to find his fiancée. However, no responses to his appeals were forthcoming. It wasn't until 6 months later that relatives were shown footage from club cameras and provided with the names of the 3 men last seen with Agnes. The large man who forcibly took Agnes out of the club and pushed her into a car was identified as Wesley Capper, the son of a well-known and influential British millionaire. In the passenger seat sat his longtime associate Craig Porter, who had no particular occupation and frequently appeared on police radar. The third individual was a doorman named Shion Usman. Both Porter and Usman stated under interrogation that they were innocent, asserting that Agnes had entered the car willingly. According to Capper, he and his friend noticed a beautiful blonde woman at the club and approached her to introduce themselves. They claimed she was already fairly drunk, contradicting her friend's statements, but didn't refuse a drink when offered one by Capper. Wesley then suggested continuing the party at his luxurious country house, an invitation Agnes allegedly accepted. However, they asserted that while en route, Agnes changed her mind about attending Wesley's party and asked to be dropped off in the middle of their journey, saying she would take a cab home instead. The man asserted that he had dropped the passenger off at her requested location, an unlit stretch of road. This area notably lacked CCTV cameras. Craig Porter, however, could neither confirm nor deny Wesley Capper's words. According to his confession, he was also very drunk and unaware of when or how Agnes was in their car. He mentioned falling asleep immediately after departing the parking lot. The third suspect, doorman Sean Usman, corroborated that Agnes Kavina appeared intoxicated but could not state whether she entered the car voluntarily. He did confirm that when the car came to a stop, she opened the door and nearly fell out due to her condition. At the driver's request, Usman closed the door and received a substantial tip for his actions. When questioned about whether the woman's actions suggested an escape attempt, he indicated he did not believe so and attributed it to her intoxication. He added that Agnes neither screamed nor sought help. Footage later surfaced showing Wesley Capper leading Agnes into the car by her waist and wrist with considerable force. His defense was that Agnes felt dizzy and he was simply holding her to prevent a fall. Subsequent investigation uncovered another curious yet disturbing video from Soto Grande in southern Spain at the port of Puerto de la Dua. This footage featured John Capper's luxury yacht being moored there. John Capper is a millionaire and father of one of the suspects. Dated September 10th, 4 days after Agnes's disappearance, it shows Wesley Craig and two other men boarding the yacht carrying a large suitcase, which appeared quite heavy, as well as a rolled-up carpet. Upon their return to Puerto de la Dua a few days later, they had no luggage with them. He claimed that he and his friends had sailed to Isa to have fun. The suitcase, he said, contained their belongings, and what the investigation mistook for a carpet was actually bedding. Where it all subsequently went, he could not explain. A thorough search of Wesley's yacht and automobile yielded no results, as both had been cleaned and dry cleaned, as if destroying any traces of DNA. However, a long blonde hair was found in the trunk of the car, but it was not possible to establish its origin because this crucial evidence mysteriously evaporated during the investigation. At the trial, the prosecution highlighted another curious detail. A few hours after Agnes was in the defendant's car, Capper called emergency services several times, but each time dropped the call without waiting for an answer. He appeared afraid or uncertain about his actions. The man himself explained that he was drunk and made the calls randomly. The lawyer for the Clavin family stated that Agnes, in his opinion, was long dead and that her body was resting somewhere on the seabed in the very suitcase that the suspects had brought aboard the yacht. In addition, he believed that the case was deliberately delayed and that criminals had plenty of time to get rid of all evidence proving their guilt. Only a year and a half after Agnes's disappearance did Capper, Porter, and Usman find themselves in court. They were accused of holding Agnes against her will and forcing her into a car. Unfortunately, due to a lack of evidence, there was nothing more to charge them with. Moreover, even though many believed otherwise, the millionaire and his friend were released on bail and quietly left the courtroom. Naturally, Agnes's relatives were outraged by this decision, but the judge remained adamant. All three men were brought to trial again in 2019, almost 5 years after Agnes's disappearance. They still denied their guilt and insisted that Kavina had gotten into their car of her own free will. The prosecutor asked for Usman to be considered an accomplice to the crime because he helped drive away the victim. Usman could have received a sentence of 5 years in prison. He delivered a passionate speech, stating that he was among the suspects due to the color of his skin and the lack of opportunity to hire a good lawyer. The money he earned? It was sent to a starving family in Africa. Capper's and Porter's lawyers argued that their clients were only guilty of persuading Agnes to get into the car, not of forcing her. In their view, the young woman was dropped off on the road as she had requested. While waiting for a cab to go home, she could have been kidnapped and killed by third parties, given that Agnes was drunk and unable to offer much resistance. The judge's verdict surprised and angered the relatives of the missing young woman because none of the defendants were punished meaningfully. Usman was cleared of all charges. Capper received a sentence of 2 years for taking advantage of Agnes's drunken state to persuade her to get into his car. Porter received 6 months for complicity. In reality, neither man spent a single day in prison as their sentences were suspended. They paid Agnes's family £101,000 in compensation, a sum her family found ridiculous. Discouraged by the decision, Agnes's family appealed. During this time, both defendants managed to break the law once again. Capper, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, knocked down a woman and fled the scene. Porter and his friend, also drunk, stole a car after beating its owner severely. Despite these serious crimes, Capper received only probation due to the expertly crafted defense by his lawyers. He paid substantial compensation to the family of the woman who died under his car's wheels and remained at large. Porter was less fortunate this time and ended up going to jail. There's no information available publicly about the sentence received in 2021, almost 7 years after Agnes's disappearance. The prime suspect, Wesley, had been living a rather immoral lifestyle, indulging in alcohol and illicit substances. This severely impacted his health. Just when he thought he had overcome the illness, he suffered a stroke. Wesley died on July 26, 2021, at the age of 44. At that time, Agnes's parents filed another appeal with the court. However, since the suspect is deceased, prosecution is no longer feasible. Regardless of what the Supreme Court decides in this challenging case, there was an unexpected twist 9 years later. Although Agnes Kavina was never found, dead or alive, she was presumed dead eventually. Subsequently, her parents, sister, and fiancé concurred with their lawyer's theory that criminals had placed Agnes's body in a suitcase and disposed of it into the sea from a yacht to ensure it wouldn't be discovered. In the summer of 2023, exactly 9 years after Agnes vanished without a trace, the case took another unexpected turn. In mid-June of that year, a gardener working at one of the elite golf clubs in Costa del Sol discovered something unusual near the coast while cleaning up. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be an old and badly damaged suitcase. Hesitant to open it himself, he called the police. Inside this suitcase were human remains. Examinations revealed that these bones belonged to a young woman whose age at death was approximately between 25 to 35 years old. Moreover, it was determined that this suitcase, with its contents, had been submerged underwater for about 10 years before being washed ashore. After piecing together all available information, police hypothesized that this body could belong to none other than Agnes Kavina, who disappeared 9 years ago. To verify this assumption conclusively requires several examinations comparing Agnes's DNA with those remains found in the suitcase. At present moment, experts are meticulously working on establishing these facts. However, details surrounding this investigation have not yet been made public. Should their suspicions be validated, it would provide grounds for reopening the case and pursuing legal action against any surviving suspects involved in her demise. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rachel O'Reilly. The Rachel O'Reilly case stands among Ireland's most violent crimes. In the early 2000s, Rachel O'Reilly's case shocked all of Ireland with its unprecedented cruelty and cold-blooded nature. A young woman and mother of 2 children was brutally murdered in her own home. Police officers who arrived at the scene admitted they'd never encountered such a horrific crime before. To solve this mystery and piece together all the clues took investigators several years of painstaking work. During this time, the criminal remained free and believed his guilt would never be revealed. So, let's take a detailed look at the entire story from the beginning. Rachel O'Reilly was born in 1974 on Dublin's northern outskirts. She did not know her biological parents early on because she was adopted by Rose and Jim Cowley. Raised with 4 other adopted children by Rose and Jim, who couldn't have their own heirs, she received all their parental love without reservation. From a young age, Rachel was active and determined. She excelled in school, played sports, and helped with household chores without causing any problems whatsoever. Sociable and incredibly kind, she easily got along with everyone and avoided conflicts. As a teenager, Rachel became seriously engaged in softball, participated in various competitions, and set multiple local records. Additionally, she had a very strong bond with her foster mother and confided all her secrets to her. She kept in touch consistently, even after getting married and having children. Finishing high school, she enrolled at a nearby, choosing to pursue a degree in marketing. Simultaneously, she secured a job as a salesperson at a city department store. In her spare time, she stayed active in sports, playing for the local team. Regarding Joe O'Reilly, there's scant information available about his early life from public sources. He gained notoriety for his harsh and extremely cruel treatment of his spouse and the mother of his 2 children. However, details about his youth are rarely discussed or recalled. What is known is that Joe hails from County Dublin, where he was born in 1972 into a modest family. He was the second child and was raised along with an elder sister. The O'Reilly children were not pampered and were taught by their parents that success in life must be earned through one's own efforts and hard work. Joe was notably tall and athletic and also had an interest in softball. After completing high school, he opted to study advertising through correspondence courses. To support himself financially, he took up a position as a manager at a department store, the same store where Rachel joined a few months later. At the time of their initial meeting, Joe was 19 years old, while Rachel had just turned 17. The young man quickly noticed the new hire and made it a point to introduce himself first. Her petite stature and radiant smile quickly captivated Joe. She resolutely declined his invitations to go on dates with him. Undeterred, Joe continued his pursuit of Rachel by offering compliments and small surprises, such as flowers or chocolates, at her workplace each morning. Nevertheless, she remained indifferent to these gestures. The persistent effort to win over the young saleswoman was observed by nearly all the department store's staff, and ultimately became a source of amusement and jokes among them. However, Joe didn't give up. He read Rachel's favorite book so they'd have a common topic for conversation. But it was only when Joe discovered Rachel was serious about softball that things took off. He joined her at the stadium, walked onto the field during practice, and even participated in the game. Given his familiarity with softball, he demonstrated exceptional skills, leading the team to victory. This time, Joe managed to impress Rachel, and she finally agreed to go on a date with him. Their relationship developed rapidly. Joe did everything possible to show he was committed to Rachel, willing to overcome any obstacle for her. He surprised her with a trip to Paris, widely regarded as the most romantic city in the world. Atop the Eiffel Tower, he proposed marriage. Of course, Rachel couldn't resist and accepted his proposal. She believed she had met a prince from a magical fairy tale, ready to live a long and happy life with him. A few years later, they married and had 2 sons close together. The family moved to Knoll in Scotland, a quiet and picturesque province, where they purchased their own spacious and cozy home. After their eldest son's birth, Rachel left her job to become a housewife, dedicating herself entirely to her husband and child. 2 years later, they welcomed another son. As a result, Rachel became fully engrossed in caring for their children, while Joe provided for the family. Joe secured a position at an advertising agency as an advertising specialist. Those who knew him personally described him as confident and purposeful, yet charming. At work, he established himself as responsible and highly qualified. punctual and meticulous. He was always the first in the office and often stayed late if needed. Joe maintained his active involvement in sports too. He frequently visited the gym before work began each day. There were various exercise machines and a set of dumbbells. As the boys grew up and started attending kindergarten, Rachel sought additional income by becoming a distributor for a renowned cosmetics company and also sold household goods. This work allowed her to interact more with neighbors, who often described her as an excellent mother and a friendly, approachable person. With time, Joe's visits home became less frequent. In fact, he seemed to come home only to shower and change clothes. He attributed this behavior to being extremely occupied at work and anticipating a promotion he was eagerly looking forward to. Rachel supported him as best she could. However, they gradually began to drift apart as family relations noticeably deteriorated. In the summer of 2004, an unfortunate event occurred. An anonymous letter was sent to Child Protective Services claiming that Rachel was a negligent mother who mistreated her sons, aged 4 and 2. This led to a special commission visiting their home in response to the alarming report. Although no suspicious activities were found and all relatives and neighbors vouched for Mrs. O'Reilly as a loving mother, the letter still cast doubt on her reputation. What happened to Rachel O'Reilly? On the morning of Monday, October 4, 2004, everything seemed normal. The family's head left at dawn while his wife and sons were still asleep. Throughout the day, Joe texted and called his wife multiple times but received no response. When he dialed their home phone, the answering machine picked up. Joe's voice was shaky as he expressed his concern and asked Rachel to return his call promptly. That afternoon, Joe received a call from the kindergarten teacher informing him that Rachel hadn't picked up the boys, something unprecedented. Worriedly, Joe contacted his mother-in-law to inquire about Rachel's whereabouts. When she said she didn't know either, he requested Rose go check their house to ensure everything was fine. In the meantime, he went to the kindergarten to pick up the children. When Rose arrived at her daughter's home, she saw her car in the yard and realized Rachel was home. However, the room itself was dark and quiet, and no one answered her call. The first thing that caught Rose's eye was the clutter, as if the house had been searched for something. Cabinets and drawers were open, with their contents strewn on the floor, making it look like a robbery. The landlady was nowhere to be found. But when Rose entered the bedroom, a horrifying scene appeared before her eyes. Rachel was lying on the floor in a huge pool of her own blood. There was blood everywhere, on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling. Through Rachel's bloody, tangled hair, in some places, bare bones of her skull could be seen. Rose rushed to her daughter, hoping she was still alive and could be helped. But when she touched her arm, she felt it cold and stiff. Rachel had been dead for hours, and there was no way to help her. Unable to collect herself, Rose started screaming and calling for help. Then she rushed to the phone to call the police. At her screams, neighbors, among whom was a doctor, came running. He was the first to examine the body and confirmed Rachel could not be helped. When Joe arrived at the house, there was already a crowd of people there. Upon learning his spouse was dead, he screamed and ran inside, saying he didn't believe it. In the bedroom by his wife's body, he became hysterical, crying, screaming, and promising to kill whoever had done this to his beloved wife. According to police officers who arrived on scene, they've never seen a more brutal picture of a massacre of a defenseless woman in their practice. Obviously, the weapon used in this crime was some heavy blunt object, which Rachel had been beaten with incredible ferocity. There's literally nothing left on her body intact. It appears that she was attacked from behind because there were no signs of resistance or fighting back. Everything looked like it resembled a robbery. However, professional instinct told investigators that such beating comes only with personal motives or intense dislike. But who would wish harm on a petite young woman and mother of 2 children? The first step detectives took was to interview Rachel's family members and neighbors. All of them confidently stated that Rachel had no enemies or ill-wishers. She was on friendly terms with everyone. Neighbors, on that day, did not notice anything suspicious, no strange cars or strangers near the victim's house. Joe mentioned he had been at the bus depot on the other side of town most of the day, where he had gone for work. His alibi could be confirmed by a co-worker. However, police remained haunted by vague doubts. Something felt off. The situation appeared as if it might be a robbery, but nothing of value was taken. Scattered items in the bedside table of the layout in plain sight. Unusually, 1,000 EUR remained untouched in the bedroom. Another stash was in a kitchen cupboard, but also untouched. A jewelry box on the dressing table missed only a pair of chains and earrings that were lying separately in a drawer. According to the homeowner, a digital camera, silverware, and one dumbbell, which was likely the weapon used for the crime, were missing. It all seemed too strange. The house was turned upside down and the landlady brutally murdered? Joe answered police questions while crying, shaking, and feverish. But as an investigator later noted, his emotional state seemed more like nervous excitement than grief or shock. When asked if his wife might have had an affair, Joe's demeanor changed. He confidently claimed there was no such thing and added that he had not cheated on his wife either, but this phrase sounded very unconvincing. 2 miles from the crime scene, in some bushes, investigators found a bag containing items missing from the house: a camera, silverware, and some pieces of jewelry. All items matched Joe's list of stolen goods. Consequently, any theory of robbery could be dismissed completely. This case became one of premeditated murder. Despite Joe's attempts to portray grief and pain, which appeared fake, he immediately became the primary suspect. As of now, Joe has presented nothing to counter these suspicions. The detectives needed to thoroughly examine Joe's alibi to investigate the crime scene and understand his relationship with his wife. Joe claimed that, on the morning before work, he decided to stop by the gym, as he did regularly. Surveillance cameras in the parking lot and inside the gym confirmed his presence. He then drove to his office and later traveled to a bus station in a remote part of the city to monitor advertisements on vehicles. A colleague corroborated his story, asserting they had spoken on the phone during that period. The investigators proceeded to Joe's workplace and seized his computer for inspection. This led to new findings. Although Joe had partially deleted some email correspondences, specialists managed to recover them. The recovered messages convinced the police they were on the right track. Most of Joe's emails were with his friend and sister, wherein he frequently complained about his wife. He often used insults and profane language when referring to Rachel, expressing that she had not attracted him in a long time and generally caused him outright disgust. Additionally, investigators uncovered curious correspondence between Joe and a colleague named Nikki Pell, revealing a relationship more intimate than mere friendship. Nikki Pell also worked at an advertising company, resulting in frequent work interactions with Joe. Despite being 10 years older than him, their affair continued unabated. The start of their workplace romance was indeterminable. However, messages indicated that Joe spent evenings and even nights at her place while misleading his wife about being busy with work. Moreover, Joe's communications with Nikki revealed promises that soon they would be together permanently. He, she, and their sons, referring to his children with Rachel, received messages that were more than suspicious. In the case of a divorce, the boys would stay with their mother. Joe, who initially claimed he had no affairs on side, realized it was pointless to deny his actions when irrefutable evidence of his infidelity emerged. He then admitted he had indeed been secretly dating Nikki for a while, but alleged they had broken up more than a week prior. The O'Reilly house was declared a crime scene and remained cordoned off for over a week, as the police needed to scrutinize and document everything meticulously. During this period, Joe stayed with his sister while the boys stayed with their grandparents. At Rachel's funeral, Joe did not resemble a grieving husband. In fact, he acted remarkably calm and appeared to be shunning the coffin. When it was his turn to say goodbye, he did so quickly and coldly, and upon leaving, indifferently said that the coffin could be closed and buried. When the family was eventually allowed to return home, Everything looked as it did on the day of the crime, except for Rachel's body being absent from the floor. Joe asked his father-in-law and mother-in-law to accompany him, which they agreed to do, thinking he needed support. However, once there, Joe began speculating about how the killer might have attacked Rachel. He walked around the room where his wife had been murdered and described how she might have been assaulted, the force used in each strike, pointing each time at dried blood spatters. He suggested that the perpetrator could have gone to the bathroom to wash off blood from both hands and weapon before taking it away. His account was horrifyingly detailed, complete with arm movements mimicking blows. Despite Joe's strange behavior during this recounting, one filled with unsettling detail, his grief-stricken parents wrote it off as an attempt to relieve stress by talking it out. However, Rose later admitted that she couldn't shake off suspicions that her son-in-law may have been reenacting actions he himself had committed earlier, and believed he might have been responsible for massacring their daughter in a desperate bid for fame almost immediately after her death. After the funeral, O'Reilly began to actively engage with the press. He started giving interviews frequently and even invited reporters to his home, practically gave them tours of the crime scene, describing how everything happened. Each time he was on camera, Joe addressed the criminal, urging them to voluntarily surrender to the police. 3 weeks after the tragedy, loved ones of the deceased agreed to participate in a TV program dedicated to this crime. Rachel's parents were visibly depressed and overwhelmed by grief. In contrast, Joe acted as if he was a star on the set. He engaged enthusiastically with makeup artists, curious about how he would look on camera. During breaks, he eagerly consumed offered treats and coffee. The police, still suspicious of Joe, decided to follow him. They discovered that after leaving the set, Joe went straight to his mistress Nikki's place and spent the night there. By then, any remaining doubts that Joe was the killer had vanished. The only thing left was gathering irrefutable evidence for court. Gathering evidence proved to be a lengthy and meticulous process since they couldn't find the murder weapon. Nevertheless, there was plenty of other evidence available. Nikki and a colleague, who had confirmed Joe's alibi initially and were facing jail time for perjury, decided not to risk their freedom any further. Nikki confessed that she and Joe hadn't broken up as they previously claimed, but had continued their relationship. Rachel found out about their affair, leading to a significant scandal just before the tragedy occurred. The colleague admitted uncertainty about whether Joe was indeed at the bus station across town at his wife's murder time. He had merely agreed with Joe's story without realizing Joe was a suspect. Recovered correspondence from Joe's computer revealed he had insulted his wife and planned a future with his mistress and children. This was also added as evidence in the case. Police also reviewed numerous interviews with Joe and footage from the TV program he participated in. They concluded that he described the crime in such detail that only someone involved could know those specifics, indicating carelessness on his part. Here are observations that helped reconstruct the full sequence of the crime. In the morning, Joe made it a point to go to the gym, ensuring he appeared on all surveillance cameras. He also informed his colleagues he would be working in another part of the city and might be unreachable. However, instead of heading to the bus station as stated, he went home. There, he armed himself with a dumbbell and hid in the marital bedroom, waiting for his wife to return from taking their children to kindergarten. He attacked her from behind, leaving no chance for escape. After committing the act, Joe admitted to washing off both himself and the weapon in the bathroom next to the bedroom. He changed clothes, scattered his belongings around the house to stage a robbery, and proceeded to work. On his way, he disposed of incriminating items like his soiled clothes and dumbbells. He then went on to call his deceased wife's cell phone several times, leaving messages and voicemails asking her to call him back. At work, his strange demeanor and trembling hands did not go unnoticed by colleagues who asked if he was okay. Joe evaded their concerns and rushed to his office. Later that day, Joe received a call from the daycare informing him that his children had not been picked up. Rather than hurrying home, he sent his mother-in-law, ensuring she would be the one to discover Rachel's body first. Joe believed he had covered all tracks and that proving his guilt would be impossible. However, his desire for notoriety ultimately backfired. Although most evidence was circumstantial, investigators were able to piece together Joe's movements through cell phone signal tracking, determining that at the time of Rachel's murder, Joe's phone was at their family home. Joe wasn't taken into custody until 2 years after committing the crime. Ultimately, though, with meticulous reconstruction of that day's events, his guilt was conclusively established by evidence such as cell phone signals tracing every step. In addition, it was disclosed at trial that the anonymous letter to Child Protective Services was penned by Joe's mother at Joe's own instigation. Joe knew that he wouldn't have sole custody of the boys if a divorce occurred, so he attempted to defame his wife by portraying her as a negligent and abusive mother. However, social services officials found no evidence to support the claims in an anonymous message. O'Reilly chose to proceed decisively. He exhibited no remorse, smiling in the courtroom and conversing animatedly with his defense attorneys. He even made attempts at humor, under the belief that he would be acquitted. Yet in the summer of 2007, the court found Joe guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. The lawyers endeavored to overturn this decision and filed numerous complaints and appeals. All were ultimately dismissed. Remarkably, the relationship between Joe and Nikki persisted even after Joe's incarceration. Nikki visited him consistently for many years. However, in 2022, for unspecified reasons, their communication ceased. Joe O'Reilly has never admitted guilt while in prison. He has become an exemplary inmate who causes no disturbances, with hopes of becoming eligible for parole one day. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Tristan Borlase. On April 10, 2019, a significant tragedy occurred involving 17-year-old Tristan Borlase. This teenager, from a devout family, violently attacked and killed his relatives at their home in Deep Gap, North Carolina. On that Wednesday evening, emergency services received a call from a young woman. She reported a large amount of blood in her home and mentioned that her parents and younger brother were missing. Attempts to reach them had been unsuccessful. Police officers immediately responded to the situation, driving to the family home in Deep Gap, located near the Watauga and Wilkes County border. Upon arrival, they discovered blood on the walkway leading to the house, on the mat by the front door, and trailing inside up the stairs. As officers searched outside the home, they found a man's body covered with leaves under a hammock. The man had multiple stab wounds. Later that night, at about 10:30 p.m., authorities found the family's pickup truck concealed in the woods. Inside was the woman's body covered with a blanket and bags of mulch placed on top of her. Jeffrey Borlase, Tristan's father, was born on April 16, 1975. He served as pastor of Pist Bible Fellowship Church, a conservative Protestant movement with Mennonite roots. Tristan grew up in an environment emphasizing personal piety and constant awareness of God's watchful eye. Serious Bible study sessions and moral instructions formed the basis of his upbringing. Even entertainment like laughter or colorful clothing was frowned upon within this community. Things such as good works, charity, missionary work, love for one's enemies, and renunciation of all forms of violence were highly valued virtues. Jeffrey upheld these principles as well, since he was raised under similar circumstances by Pastor Harry Boras. As a boy and young man, Jeffrey exemplified kindness, gentleness, and patience. During his youth as a young adult man, Jeffrey worked at Big Surf Water Park located on Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri during summer breaks from schooling routines back then. On his first day of work, the young man encountered a charming and meek girl named Tanya Mae Trandom. She was of the same age, had similar views, and shared almost identical upbringing with him. Tanya, like Jeffrey, was raised in a family where Christian values were of utmost importance. A patient and humble girl, she saw in the devout man an ideal future husband and a caring father. She gave Jeffrey a picture of an elderly couple holding hands and remarked, "That will be us one day." Jeffrey's mother, Kathy Brown, prayed earnestly that God would bless her son with a wife who loved the Lord wholeheartedly. She believed her prayers were answered when Jeffrey met Tanya. The young couple married and continued living according to the values they were taught in their own families. The photo presented by Tanya was carefully preserved in their family album. Soon after their marriage, the couple welcomed their first child, an adorable girl named Taylor. Not long after Taylor's birth came 3 more children, the youngest being a son named Tristan. Taylor embraced her role as the eldest sibling wholeheartedly. She took care of her brothers and sisters, constantly supporting them. Among all her siblings, she had a special bond with her younger brother Tristan. Despite their age difference, they were inseparable. Jeffrey and Tanya held firm beliefs about parenting, viewing it as their mission to instill Christian values in their children's hearts. As their 4 children grew older, they decided to extend their family further by adopting 4 more boys from an orphanage. Open-hearted and loving, according to others' descriptions, their family expanded to include 8 children: Taylor, twins Kay and Alexis, Misery, Ale, Stephen, Miku, and Tristan. In line with the family's religious beliefs, children were not permitted to use cell phones or social networks until reaching a certain age. They emphasized simplicity in needs and desires as well. Additionally, boys were forbidden to engage in romantic relationships until they completed high school at 18 years old. Bible study sessions and other religious activities were mandatory components of their upbringing. Despite these guidelines rooted in asceticism and discipline, the children grew up like any other boys and girls, with love and support from their devoted parents guiding them along the way. Parents made no distinction between native and adopted children. They all received the same attention, care, and affection. The loving mother fostered a harmonious atmosphere, carefully monitoring the internal relationships among brothers and sisters. She prayed frequently and engaged in various good deeds. The couple believed in nurturing virtue through their actions and instilled mercy in their children by setting an example. When a hurricane struck Haiti, Tanya sold her expensive wedding ring and donated the proceeds to a foundation dedicated to building housing for the victims. In place of her costly ring, she acquired a simple, modest one. In 2015, Taylor graduated from high school and moved to Boone to attend Appalachian State University. This event was particularly difficult for Tristan, as he lost his closest companion and found himself alone. Although Taylor returned home at every opportunity, she now had her own independent life, leaving Tristan with the same old rules and routines that he'd always opposed. Tristan had long rebelled against the restrictions his parents imposed since childhood and disagreed with their religious views. He was particularly frustrated by the lack of a cell phone and the inability to connect with peers on social networks, an integral part of modern teenage life. After Taylor's departure, quarrels with his parents increased. In December 2017, there were significant changes within the family's life. Jeffrey, his wife, and their children moved to a new house with a large lot in Deep Gap, Watauga County, North Carolina. The house was situated on a dirt road leading into a wooded area and offered much more space than their previous home. Additionally, it was located just under 2 miles from Robin's residence, Tanya's mother, and the children's grandmother, making it easy to seek her help when needed for looking after the youngest children. He attended the local high school and began participating in and field. Other kids took jobs as counselors at summer camps. At first glance, it might have seemed that there was never any trouble in the Borlas household. Over time, Tristan's behavior became troubling. In 2018, the school insisted on several consultations with a psychologist due to anger issues and a lack of control. By 2019, when Tristan was in high school, he started having trouble understanding some school subjects. These difficulties grew with each passing day. From being a diligent student who always participated in school activities before the move, he turned into an indifferent and withdrawn teenager with a lack of interest in his studies. Tristan began arriving late for lessons and showed no desire to learn at all. It got to the point where he would put his headphones on during class and sit with an absent expression. Some teachers tried to help Tristan, and he even made contact, but everything ended with unchanged indifference. At home, Tristan's behavior also became a concern. By this time, he had everything but constantly argued with his parents about his cell phone and access to social networks. He spent considerable time on the internet. On his Instagram account, he referred to himself as a musician. His sister Taylor remained interested in her siblings' lives and noticed that Tristan quarreled more frequently with their parents and argued about religious topics with their mother. She also learned of his other problems at school. The sister attempted to talk to her brother, but realized their former closeness was gone. After some time, Tristan befriended a girl from the religious community named Evelyn Faith Jackson. They began meeting without particularly observing prohibitions on intimate relations. Sometimes they even smoked forbidden substances together. Tristan expressed complaints about his mother's nightly discussions regarding his behavior, which left him feeling tired and unable to concentrate in school. The young man grew very concerned that many of his faults caused him not to live up to his mother's expectations. She can't take pride in him, told that he can be himself with his father, but it's different with his mother. On April 10, 2019, a lot of secrets from Tristan's life came to light. Surveillance cameras were installed in the barn. Tristan's old cell phone, which he occasionally used without his parents knowing, was used as an access point. On this particular day, Tanya took the phone for some reason and discovered text messages indicating her son was having inappropriate conversations with girls and discussing illegal drugs. Tristan was at school when he noticed his phone blinking with incoming messages. His shocked parents confronted him through a family chat about what they had found on the old phone. That same day, Sher King, an English teacher in Tristan's class, called his mother to complain about his grades and behavior. During the trial, it was revealed that Tanya Borlas had called Miss King back, informing her that she and her husband would soon come to the school to pick Tristan up to discuss his academic performance. Miss King conveyed this message to Tristan, who was quite surprised by the news. The couple left their youngest child with his grandmother and headed to the middle school to address these issues. The ride home was silent. At trial, Tristan testified that his mother appeared tense and frowned frequently while going through his phone. A conversation ensued at home for about an hour and a half. Afterward, Tanya texted her mother stating that although they had taken away Tristan's phone and car keys until his grades and behavior improved, he did not seem upset by this. She informed her mother that she would be coming soon to pick up the younger child. This message was sent at 4 p.m., after which it seems the discussion continued. From Tristan's account, he and his mother talked about the importance of doing well in school and maintaining cleanliness at home. He was forced to listen and realized there was a lot in him needing correction. They even made a list of qualities should develop to become a better person: compassion, honesty. This list would later be found by the police. At one point, Tristan said his mother approached him from behind, put her arm around his neck, and applied pressure. He instinctively jumped up, turned around, and accidentally hit her. According to him, his mother had never done anything like that before, so he reacted that way. His mother was startled by the blow, grabbed what he thought were scissors from a shelf, and moved toward her son. In shock at what was happening, he stabbed her thinking he was defending himself and ran to his father for help. Later forensic examination found no evidence on Tristan's neck, indicating his mother strangled him. During the trial, the prosecution showed photos of Tristan Borlas's neck taken by the medical examiner that displayed a broken neck bone. On the other hand, the psychologist would explain during the trial that in his opinion Tristan Borlas was mentally sane at the time of the crime, but suffered from a severely impaired cognitive state. He was experiencing depersonalization, derealization, and felt events were unreal. However, the court and jury, they would disregard the psychologist's opinion, finding Tristan to be a skillful manipulator and socially dangerous individual. According to Tristan, he did not understand what was happening, or why his father was running away from him, or why he stabbed him when he caught up even though he begged for help. He remembered his father picking up a rock saying, "Tristan, don't," but thought his father would rather let him be killed than try to harm him. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams on the Boers property at about 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday. After it was over, Tristan returned to the house where he vomited, indicating severe stress, not cold-blooded, calculated murder in the psychologist's opinion. The jury disagreed with the psychologist's opinion because they had seen the forensic medical examiner's reports during the trial. Jeffrey B.'s autopsy report detailed multiple stab wounds to his left chest back, slash wounds his arms and hands, and abrasions his skull and forehead. Tanya Borla's autopsy report showed that she had multiple wounds in her left chest and arm, while as injuries likely sustained from neck compression. These findings suggested that the parents were defending themselves rather than attacking. Tristan had an opportunity to escape from his mother if he felt threatened. Even if the mother experienced a sudden lapse of judgment or misperceived self-defense, the father's murder and subsequent actions appeared different. Tristan returned home, removed his mother's body, placed it in a truck under a tarp, cleaned the crime scene for about an hour, and even used a hose to wash down the porch. Around 8:30 p.m., Tristan went to his grandmother's house to pick up his younger brother. His brother Robin thought this was very strange. Tristan explained that his parents urgently needed to go to the store and apologized for not having time to stop by to pick up his brother. About 20 minutes later, Robin received a call from another grandson who complained that their parents were not answering the phone and hadn't come to pick him up from work as usual. Grandma called Alexis and asked her to retrieve her brother. They agreed to meet at Jeffrey and Tanya's house to figure out what had happened. When they arrived at the house, Robin noticed blood on the porch, but wasn't overly concerned since the couple raised animals there. She went inside to get a flashlight to check on them and discovered blood everywhere. At this point, Alexis ran into the house reporting she found some kind of body under a hammock near the animal barn and thought she saw Tristan with blood on his face in a getaway car. Alexis called emergency services. The operator instructed her and all family members to lock themselves in the car and wait for the police. The police arrived 10 minutes later. After several hours of waiting outside and talking to officers, they were taken to the station where they were informed that Jeffrey and Tanya Barassi had been found dead. While examining the crime scene, detectives found a computer interface in the home. It connected the video surveillance system inside the house to the monitors. Detectives saw a screen with a grid of various cameras broadcasting live video feeds. They immediately requested a warrant to obtain credentials from the servicing company. Meanwhile, Tristan contacted his girlfriend Evelyn and went over to her home. She noticed he seemed worried and had a few scratches on his forehead and arms. Tristan assured her that he had only argued with his parents and got the scratches while playing with his dog. Evelyn described Tristan's injuries: 3 scratches on his forehead, a wound on his hand, a cut on his finger, and a bruised fingernail. Right after the crime, Tristan posted a photo of his injuries on Snapchat, saying he was hurt by his father's dog. According to Evelyn, this photo matched what she saw that evening. Tristan stayed over that night. The next morning, they went to Walmart and McDonald's, but decided against going to school. Evelyn thought Tristan just wanted some time away from his parents, so she suggested staying with one of her relatives for a while. He agreed, and they traveled to another state. On April 11th, Sheriff's Office personnel obtained the username and password to the Barassi home's video surveillance system. After reviewing the camera footage, they learned about the circumstances of the crime. Police obtained a warrant for Tristan's arrest and turned over details about their vehicle. He allegedly drove away to the National Crime Information Center. A search of the car began, and soon after, a chase ensued. investigator Matthew received intel that Tristan had been spotted in Tennessee and quickly began the paperwork necessary to catch the alleged perpetrator. He requested Robin, Tristan's grandmother, to accompany him during the apprehension so he could speak to Tristan in her presence due to his young age. As they were driving with Evelyn, Tristan noticed blue lights trailing them. He accelerated and told his friend that his parents must have registered the car as stolen to locate him. Speeding down the highway, he tried to evade capture, but eventually pulled over when he couldn't escape his pursuers any longer. The Ford was quickly surrounded by police cars. Evelyn was utterly confused upon witnessing her boyfriend being handcuffed and taken away in a squad car. The officers observed that Tristan did not appear particularly upset or agitated. On April 11, 2019, investigator Matthew conducted an interview with Tristan. It was both videotaped and audio recorded. The young man answered all questions, confessed to the crime, and detailed his actions in full, occasionally breaking into tears. Tristan Boris, who was just a month shy of his 18th birthday, was taken into custody without bail. Shortly thereafter, the sheriff's office secured a warrant to search Tristan's Snapchat account, along with 5 cell phones that could contain pertinent information related to the crime. Another warrant was issued for the Orchard Road home, where detectives discovered another phone in the master bedroom, alongside various items including a keyboard, pen from a safe, paper cups, hammer, straw, knives, red-stained swab eyeglasses, kitchen towel hammock, digital video recorder, rug, and miscellaneous papers, South Dakota cards, boots. According to court documents, a search warrant was also issued for the Ford F-150 truck, where investigators seized a red-stained swab laptop, top computer charger, and steering wheel cover. Additionally, authorities obtained a warrant to search the home of Tristan's girlfriend in Boone, since he had spent the night at her house. Court documents state that a pillowcase, a zippered sweatshirt, and a notebook were seized from the property. The findings from the investigations and searches enabled investigators to piece together the chronology of events in great detail. The claim of self-defense was found to be untenable. Funeral services for the couple took place on April 17, 2019, at Bible Fellowship Church, with pastors William C.R. and Brad Gray officiating the ceremony. The children, grappling with the loss of their parents at such a young age, managed to write an emotive obituary. "Our parents never got the opportunity to live for themselves because they always lived for us. Jeff and Tanya have always brought immense joy and pride to their parents. Our parents made the world a better place, and we aim to continue that legacy by passionately loving people and pursuing faith." After the funeral, Taylor visited her brother in prison for the first time and was taken aback by his demeanor. Tristan showed no remorse and attempted to lay blame on the family for the incident. To his sister, it appeared he believed he would regain his freedom eventually. Disgusted, Taylor left. Her second visit was on May 11th for Tristan's birthday, accompanied by Grandma Robin. However, this meeting fared no better than the last. Her brother boasted about a party thrown for him in prison to celebrate his birthday, a behavior Taylor found unacceptable considering their parents' tragic death. Following this visit, the family decided to sever all contact with Tristan. The trial began on February 16, 2022. During proceedings, Tristan expressed regret for what had transpired and concurred with everything his family had said about him. He supported a permanent ban on contact to ensure his family's sense of safety. On March 3rd, Tristan Bohr was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for each count of first-degree murder. Judge Horn noted that mental health issues were considered as somewhat mitigating factors during sentencing. According to the psychologist's report, Tristan Borlas continues to suffer from anxiety, depression, and exhibits symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. However, Judge Horn noted that the psychologist found no indication of psychotic disorders. Although the anxiety and depression may have been exacerbated by continued drug use, what's particularly unusual in this case is that neither Tristan's family, nor his lawyer, nor he himself provided any statements about his motives behind the crime. Here we have a perplexing situation. A devout family with a socially dangerous individual who abused illegal drugs and couldn't fully grasp or articulate the reasons for his actions. On one hand, there's a young man with low self-esteem who exhibits symptoms of anxiety and hasn't received adequate medical care. During the court session, it was mentioned that his mother helped him cope with panic attacks since she experienced them herself. One foundational principle of certain educational theories posits that children burdened with original sin are inherently immoral from birth. Therefore, education must correct them by imposing strict discipline and suppressing their self-awareness. This so-called strict love is supposedly beneficial for children. Tristan might have had an inherited overreactivity of the nervous system and grew up under stringent limits, constantly feeling inadequate as a devout individual. Some require more love, while others require less. According to recollections shared by his older sister, Tristan was intensely jealous of new siblings who diverted parental attention away from him. Initially rebellious, he then sank into depression and feelings of worthlessness, compounded by illicit drug use and subsequent panic attacks, as well as depersonalization, derealization states. He couldn't embrace his parents' devotion to their faith and couldn't meet his mother's expectations or align with what she envisioned for him, which required correction. Instead of securing a competent therapist's assistance as needed, changes were listed together by him and his mother. This approach may have missed critical opportunities to address underlying issues. Could this senseless and tragic event have been avoided in a truly loving family? That remains uncertain, a question echoic in the aftermath. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Zoe Sarnacki. Zoe Sarnacki was born on March 25, 1991, in Portland, Maine, a city in the northwest of the United States. She was raised in a loving family consisting of her parents, John and Linda Sarnacki, her brother Gregory, and two half-sisters, with whom she still maintains a close relationship. Zoe's father, John, worked as a construction worker and provided well for the family. As a result, Zoe was exposed to a variety of creative activities from a young age, which led to her strong interest in art. Her family also loved animals and had 5 cats at home. As Zoe grew older, she became increasingly curious and developed a strong desire to travel and experience different cultures. She also adopted a vegan lifestyle, choosing to consume only plant-based foods and avoiding animal products. Zoe was raised in an ecologically conscious culture that prioritized animal welfare, environmental conservation, and healthy living. This culture played a major role in shaping her personality. By the time she started high school in 2005, Zoe had already built up a large group of friends who considered her to be cheerful, enthusiastic, and friendly. However, things changed in 2008 when Zoe made a shocking decision on her 17th birthday. She decided to drop out of school. Her friends and family were surprised by the decision, and her parents were particularly unhappy with her choice. Despite this sudden change, Zoe's former classmates remember her fondly, describing her as a kind and loving person. A few months after leaving school, Zoe found a job at a local bakery and cafe called Bagel Works, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. On March 25, 2009, Zoe's 18th birthday, she was looking forward to getting a tattoo on one of her arms. Inspired by the works of Austrian artist Gustav Klimt, she had a clear idea of the design she wanted. Zoe went to a tattoo parlor in the Old Port area. There, she met 27-year-old tattoo artist Chad Gurney. They quickly formed a bond, and after just a few days of meeting, Zoe agreed to start a romantic relationship with him. Notably, their 9-year age gap did not stop her from pursuing a relationship with Chad. Chad had a unique background. Born and raised in Maine, he attended Wells High School, where he was known as the goalie for lacrosse, a competitive sport played between 2 teams using a small rubber ball and a long-handled stick. After graduating from high school, Chad moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, to attend Liberty University, an institution known for its ties to the famous evangelical pastor Jerry Falwell. Chad has many tattoos on his body, most of which depict aliens. One design stands out, a gray alligator tattoo. In the context of tattoos, alien designs can mean two things. One is that the person believes in the existence of beings from other planets, and two is that it reflects the personality of the person wearing the tattoo, who is trying to say that they do not fit into this world, that they are different from others, and that they are unique. As for the reptile tattoo, it is said to symbolize danger and hostility, a predator to be avoided. Before moving to Portland in 2005, Chad had a difficult time recovering from a near-fatal car accident in Alabama that had occurred 4 years earlier. On a trip to a lacrosse game, a local van carrying players and coaches was hit from behind by a car and pushed into the oncoming lane, where it collided with a large truck. The impact threw Chad from the van and he nearly lost his leg. He has undergone approximately 20 surgeries due to severe head injuries. Chad underwent a psychiatric evaluation following his accident, which revealed that he had cognitive impairments. These impairments affected his speech, memory, and mathematical reasoning. After the accident, Chad received a large settlement from a lawsuit, allowing him to become financially independent. Years later, in 2007, Chad sought treatment for anxiety and depression. He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and organic personality disorder. In 2009, Chad traveled to Hawaii alone, where he met Zoe. Chad and Zoe began dating and decided to have an open relationship, which meant they were free to see other people. After starting their relationship, Chad continued to travel. In May 2009, he took a weekend trip to Vancouver, a city in Canada. When Chad returned to Portland, Zoe confessed to him remorsefully that while he was away, she had had an affair with another man and had sex with him. At first, Chad did not seem to mind the affair, as they had previously agreed to maintain an open relationship. However, after this confession, Chad changed and began to insist that Zoe quit her job and go with him to Thailand. Zoe refused him, not knowing the devastating consequences that would follow. On May 25, 2009, Zoe came to Chad's apartment and took a nap because she was tired. While she was sleeping, Chad violently attacked her. He grabbed her by the neck, hit her in the head, and strangled her until she died. After Zoe died, Chad continued to commit crimes, including having sex with her body and then decapitating her. After committing the crime, Chad showered, dressed and drove to a nearby gas station to fill up the tank, showing a disturbing calmness after committing such a heinous act. Chad returned to his apartment, where he poured petrol over Zoe, creating a trail of fuel leading to the front door. He then set it on fire. Before the fire spread throughout the apartment, Chad quickly grabbed a backpack filled with items for his trip to Thailand, a laptop and a handgun. After the apartment was completely engulfed, Chad went to an ATM to withdraw cash and then checked into the Old Orchard Beach Motel, where he relaxed in the hot tub. A 911 call was made and emergency services were alerted to the fire at Chad's apartment. Police arrived quickly on the scene and extinguished the fire. Upon entering the building, they discovered a horrific scene. Inside the charred ruins of the apartment was a badly burned body surrounded by crosses and other religious objects. A neighbor called Chad to report that his house was on fire. Chad replied that he was out of town, headed to his hometown of Lewiston, and quickly ended the call. 2 days later, on May 26, Chad spoke to his best friend and confessed to killing Zoe, calmly explaining the events that led up to it. He appeared rational, claiming that he was exhausted from the pain and had lost control of himself. While driving through the streets of Portland, Chad carelessly ran a red light and was pulled over by a city police officer. During the stop, Chad claimed that a previous accident in 2005 had left him with mental health issues, and he asked his friend to explain this to the police over the phone. After a conversation with his friend and the police, Chad voluntarily went to the police station and confessed to Zoe's murder. The police then seized his belongings. A forensic examination of Chad's computer discovered a video of the gruesome scene on his hard drive, titled "Woman Half Decapitated Over Suspicion of Adultery." At least if she cheated, she wouldn't do it again. This incriminating evidence was later presented to the court. On Wednesday, May 27th, Zoe's high school held a moment of silence during class to honor her. Before lunch, teachers and students were informed of the tragic incident. Later that day, Christine Koo, Zoe's half-sister, issued a statement to local media on behalf of the family. She stressed that this was no ordinary murder, as the perpetrator, Chad, had committed many heinous acts. Christine reported that the police had informed her of the shocking events surrounding Zoe's murder. According to them, Chad had brutally attacked Zoe in a fit of rage, sexually assaulted her, and then set her body on fire. He then calmly went to a motel and got into a hot tub. A week after Zoe's tragic death, on June 2, 2009, a vigil was held in front of Chad's former apartment building. The vigil served as a moment of comfort for Zoe's loved ones and friends. Many strangers, shocked and outraged by the brutal crime, attended. It is estimated that more than 150 people attended the vigil and memorial service for Zoe. Candles and flowers were placed on the steps of the building where her life was tragically ended in memory of Zoe. Zoe's father, John, and her half-sister, Courtney, attended the vigil and were deeply moved by the outpouring of support from so many people. During the investigation, police interviewed Chad's friends and acquaintances, who said he was on a spiritual quest and had plans to travel to Thailand to study Eastern religions. His apartment was said to be decorated with many spiritual artifacts and symbols. Chad's personality seemed to be a mixture of contradictions. On the one hand, he was known to be kind and charming, often giving small gifts to those around him. He also expressed a desire to use the money he received from an accident to help humanity. However, Chad also had a harder side, with tattoos on his arms and a reputation for provocative and confrontational behavior. Those who knew Chad noted that his behavior often pushed people away. Robert Collins, a 24-year-old chef who knew Chad, recalled that people would often ignore him and turn away when Chad came to parties. Chad also confided to Robert that the only thing he truly sympathized with was pain, which was further emphasized by the word pain tattooed on his knuckles. Police and prosecutors have made great efforts to gather every piece of information about this brutal crime. Steve Weir, who rented an apartment from Chad in 2006, was also questioned. He mentioned religious paintings and artifacts in Chad's apartment and said Chad told him he was interested in theology but did not practice it. Watson Atkinson, a tattoo parlor owner in Portland, recalled a conversation with Chad in which Chad shared his plans to use his accident compensation to find direction in his life. However, Watson's impression of Chad was disturbing because Chad seemed to focus on teenage girls, which worried him so much that he forbade his 16-year-old daughter from communicating with Chad, and also repeatedly warned Zoe to stay away from him. An investigation into Chad's background revealed his medical history and mental health diagnoses, but subsequent evaluations by multiple psychologists during his incarceration found no evidence of delusions or hallucinations. In conversations with professionals, Chad expressed strong emotions related to his perception of Zoe's infidelity, which he claimed had frustrated him. According to court documents, he claimed that he was fed up with all his girlfriend's infidelity. He began thinking about killing Zoe when she confessed her infidelity to him. As the trial began, a 127-minute tape of the police interview was played. The tape was recorded 12 hours after the crime and featured Chad speaking to Danham police. In the recording, Chad described his relationship with Zoe as extremely close, with Zoe sometimes staying at his apartment for up to a week. He denied any history of fighting between them and believed they were destined for each other. Chad also admitted to taking Zoe's life, describing her as the most beautiful girl he had ever met and feeling he had a responsibility to tell the truth about what had happened. During his conversation with the police, Chad remained calm and apologized frequently, breaking down in tears several times. He recounted the events of May 25, 2009, saying that Zoe was napping. Chad said that he approached her and began to strangle her, causing Zoe to defend herself and scream for him to stop. According to Chad, when Zoe resisted, he hit her in the head and continued to strangle her until she lost consciousness and stopped breathing. He then detailed the next terrifying actions he performed on her body. Chad revised his testimony, saying that he used 3 knives instead of a samurai sword. He described how he placed a cross between his legs and recounted his actions while Zoe's body burned in the apartment. Chad called himself a terrible person. When questioned about the beheading, Chad claimed that he was trying to turn Zoe's death into a ritual of forgiveness. Chad said he felt haunted on the day of the murder and that everything in his life seemed to have gone dark. He described himself as a primitive person, acting on instinct for hours, which led him to commit the heinous act. The recording of the interrogation, which became key evidence in Cumberland County Superior Court, was heard in its entirety by Judge Roland Cole during the first trial. It was revealed that Chad faced serious consequences, at least 25 years in prison or possibly life in prison. However, if his mental disorder was recognized, he could be sent to a psychiatric facility in Austin. During the 2011 trial, it was determined that Chad had strangled the victim in a fit of rage. The question remains whether Chad would agree to this testimony, since he had waived his right to a jury trial. Prosecutors argued that Chad, a former Liberty University student and lacrosse champion, was fully aware of his actions. To support this claim, they presented testimony from a psychiatrist and a psychologist, both of whom agreed that Chad understood the gravity of his actions and decided to violently kill his girlfriend. Chad's defense team continued to emphasize his mental health struggles, arguing that he was out of control. On January 11, 2012, Chad's attorneys filed a motion with the Supreme Court to exclude from the case evidence found on Chad's personal computer at the time of his arrest. This evidence included a gruesome video in which he demonstrated how to decapitate an unfaithful woman. The defense argued that the video was inadmissible as evidence. Ultimately, nearly 3 years after the crime, Chad Gurney, then 30, was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of Zoe Sarnacki and an additional 25 years for arson. The judge ruled that the sentences would run consecutively. Chad's lawyers challenged the sentence, but their appeal was rejected. Zoe's family members were disappointed that Chad did not receive a life sentence. During sentencing, the presiding judge said that Chad had a distorted view of the world, but the court's main concern was whether the defendant knew that his actions were wrong. Chad's lawyer, Sarah Churchill, presented her case to the Supreme Court, claiming that Chad's concussion and other injuries from the 2005 accident had left her client in a state of confusion and delusion. She argued that the judge erred in finding Chad guilty, particularly that the search warrant should not have included his smartphone, laptop, and social media pages. Sarah Churchill argued that the court should have focused more on evidence of Chad's psychosis and unstable mental state at the time of the crime, rather than evidence found on his digital devices. The Deputy Attorney General told the court that Chad was accused of killing Zoe as an act of revenge for having an affair with another man. The Deputy Attorney General explained that a video appeared to show Chad sexually assaulting Zoe as punishment for an infidelity that he considered a betrayal. The Deputy Attorney General clarified that the prosecution did not use any information from social media to build its case against Chad. He argued that the evidence convincingly demonstrated that the defendant was fully aware of his actions at the time of the crime. After the verdict was announced, Kathy Kozev, Zoe's aunt, shared with reporters that throughout the trial she felt extremely distressed as she witnessed Chad's sight and voice, taking her back to the traumatic final moments of her niece's life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of McDermott family. Mark McDermott was born in the early 1960s in Australia. But we know that Mark was the eldest of 5 siblings. Known family members include his father, Bruce McDermott, and 2 sisters, Tracy and Nicole, with Nicole being the youngest. According to those close to him, Mark was not only a successful businessman but also a kind and easygoing person. Nicole described her brother as a wonderful person who avoided causing harm to others. Information about Mark's life is limited, especially regarding his adult life. However, we do know for sure that he traveled to the southern United States, although the reasons and circumstances are unclear. It was there that he met Johanna Dunn, a single mother raising a 4-year-old son, Donald Dunn. Donald Wayne Dunn was born in the early 1990s in West Virginia and lived there with his mother's family all his life. His grandparents played a major role in Donald's early upbringing, as they cared for him most of the time. Donald's mother, Johanna, was a single working mother who found raising a child difficult, so she asked her grandparents to help. On the rare occasions when Johanna and Donald were home together, she would often entertain him with video games or television. This reflected Johanna's difficulty in giving her son her full attention, although they tried to make time for each other. Their lives changed when Mark came along. Johanna and Mark quickly fell in love and married. Johanna took her husband's last name, and the 3 of them moved to West Virginia, becoming a happy family. From the beginning, Mark and Donald were very close, as if they were related by blood. Their relatives, including Mark's sister and father, confirmed that Mark treated Donald like his own son, and Donald also considered Mark his only father. The relationship between Donald and Mark was very close, which was evident when Donald was young. During the difficult times when Mark and Johanna were temporarily separated, Donald was still determined to stay with Mark instead of his mother. At the same time, the family faced a great challenge when Johanna was diagnosed with cancer. However, thanks to their support and solidarity, they overcame these difficulties together. Mark always took good care of his stepson, ensuring that Donald had a comfortable and fulfilling life. Although Donald is a simple man and does not ask for much, he is very grateful for the peaceful and luxurious life his stepfather has created for him. When Donald graduated from high school in 2008, Mark covered the entire cost of his college education. Donald attended Rio Salado College for the first 2 years, then transferred to Marshall University in 2010. Throughout this time, Mark continued to financially support Donald's education. Donald lives with his girlfriend and her family. He and his girlfriend have been in love since they were 15 years old. Despite this, Mark and Johanna have always been very supportive of Donald. They not only pay for Donald's tuition but also support him financially in many other ways. Specifically, they cover the costs of Donald's clothes, car insurance, daily living expenses, and food. Donald dedicates all his time and effort to studying. As a responsible and diligent student, he always strictly follows his daily study schedule. He often refuses or cancels plans to meet friends and relatives, citing the need to complete assignments or study for exams. Donald prioritizes studying above everything else in his life. During his 5 years in college, he always tried his best to graduate on time and not fall behind in any semester. May 25, 2013, a Saturday, was supposed to be the big day when he received his university diploma. However, instead of being the joyous occasion he had planned, the day turned into a heartbreaking moment that would change his life forever. While the McDermott family was preparing for Donald's graduation, an emergency call was placed from their home to 911. Johanna called the police and admitted that she had shot her husband. She insisted that the act was intentional. not an accident. Police quickly arrived at the McDermott family home. Sergeant Greg Kean of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office was one of the first law enforcement officers to arrive. When he got to the scene, he noticed that Johanna appeared to be in a state of severe shock. As he entered the home, he found Mark lying motionless on the couch in the living room. He appeared to have been reading a book when he died. Initially, Sergeant Gregg noticed that he had 2 gunshot wounds to the head. However, when investigators moved the body, they discovered a 3rd wound behind the shoulder. The medical examiner at the scene confirmed that the cause of death was head injuries, but it was possible that Mark did not die immediately after being shot. There was a lot of blood at the crime scene, suggesting that Mark had been losing blood over time before his death. According to initial reports, Donald was taking a shower to prepare for his important day. The sound of the running water from the shower drowned out the gunshots. So Donald did not hear Johanna shoot her stepfather. It was only when Donald emerged from the shower that he discovered Mark's body in the living room. On the dining room table was a pistol and a letter, presumably written by Johanna to Donald's son. In the letter, Johanna expressed her grief and explained that her marriage had become unbearable. She could no longer live with a man she did not love anymore. Johanna also apologized for leaving Donald's life when he was still a minor. At that time, Johanna and Donald were taken to the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office in a private car, where a police officer took their statements. Since Johanna was the one who called the police, the incident was initially treated as a serious case of domestic violence. In the call to the dispatcher, Johanna stated that after an argument with Mark, she had shot him in the head with a pistol in a fit of rage without realizing what she was doing. However, she later changed her story, denying what she had said before. This caught the police by surprise and forced them to adjust the entire investigation. After getting into the police car, Johanna suddenly revealed the truth that it was not her, but her son Donald who killed Mark. However, this was just the tip of the iceberg. The story was actually much more complicated than what the investigators initially thought. Johanna entered the interrogation room and met with Captain James Barr from the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office. She detailed the events that had occurred on May 25, 2013. According to Johanna, her son was scheduled to attend his graduation that morning. Before that, she had gone out to run some errands and buy groceries. Johanna had just arrived home and was about to get out of the car when Donald approached her. He asked his mother to close her eyes and follow him into the house, saying that there was a surprise. Trusting her son, Johanna complied and walked into the dining room. Donald told his mother to sit down. Suddenly, Johanna heard a distinct clicking sound. When she opened her eyes to look at her son, she was horrified to see Donald pointing his own pistol at her. The gun failed to fire, and Johanna panicked, trying to wrestle it from her son. She tried to calm down, think clearly, and make a plan to save herself from becoming Donald's victim. Seeing Mark's body, she quickly told her son that she would call 911 and take the blame for him. Although Donald was initially skeptical, he eventually agreed to his mother's plan. During her interrogation, Johanna explained why she called 911 and incriminated herself. She did so to protect herself from Donald, even though she knew she would go to jail. She believed that if she did not, Donald would kill her. Johanna expressed shock that her son would point the gun at her head and pull the trigger, something she never thought would happen in her 23 years of being a mother. The gun belonged to her. She explained that the reason the gun did not fire was probably because Donald had pulled the trigger of the semi-automatic gun too far, preventing it from firing normally. Captain James thought Johanna's story was very plausible. From the moment he met Donald, he felt something was wrong. He noticed that Donald, a 23-year-old young man, was too calm for this serious situation. His face always remained neutral, showing no emotion. Therefore, he decided to put him in a separate interrogation room, away from his mother. From the beginning of the interrogation, Donald denied any involvement in his stepfather's death. However, after being informed of Johanna's testimony, his denial quickly collapsed. James did not need to use any threats or pressure to force Donald to confess. Instead, he voluntarily recounted the whole incident, revealing every detail of the case. The story Donald told was almost unbelievable. This story begins after Donald completed his first year of college. It was clear that his academic performance was not good, and due to his low grades, he decided to drop out of school. Donald shared that at first, his courses were easy and he could get good grades just by showing up to class on time. As the semester progressed, he encountered more and more difficulties in his studies. He felt that he was not capable of continuing. Instead of admitting the truth, he decided to lie to Mark and Johanna. Not only were his close friends deceived, but his girlfriend and her family were also unaware of his true situation. According to Rachel Rush, Donald's girlfriend's sister, he created a false impression that he was studying. Donald maintained a student-like schedule, leaving and returning home at fixed times. He spent most of the day in his room and asked not to be disturbed, citing the need to focus on homework or studying for exams. To create a more convincing appearance, Donald even falsified his transcripts. This was a deliberate deception that lasted for 4.5 years. No one in Donald's life realized that he was lying to them. Donald's family trusted him completely during the time he pretended to be a student. Johanna and Mark had no idea that their son had abused the financial and emotional support they had given him all this time. Donald admitted that he had no intention of deceiving his family at first, but as time went on, it became more and more difficult to confess the truth. The main reason he could not tell the truth was because he was afraid that Mark and Johanna would stop paying for all his expenses. Although he appeared to not care much about material things like cars or expensive clothes, he did not want to give up his current lifestyle. He was well aware that he would lose a lot if his parents found out the truth. For a long time, Donald had been meticulously planning to escape all trouble. From the beginning, he had planned to kill his parents to avoid suspicion. Donald planned to leave a note similar to the one found on the dining table along with the pistol. He believed that when the police read the note, they would conclude that this was the crime of an unhappy woman who saw no other way but to kill herself. Donald told Captain James that on May 25th, he had secretly taken Johanna's pistol and kept it with him all day, pretending to be preparing for his graduation ceremony. Before carrying out the rest of his plan, he decided to go to the supermarket to have his image recorded by the surveillance cameras, in order to use this evidence to prove his innocence. Before the murder, Donald had begun to show an interest in shooting practice. Although his best friend Alex Willis found this strange, Alex did not suspect anything as he did not think Donald would want to use a gun to attack someone. Donald's considerations and conclusions left everyone who heard them afterwards confused. James shared that this young man admitted that he had even planned the emotions he would express on his face when the police arrived at the scene. He also thought about how he would support himself after losing the steady income provided by Mark, and decided to take advantage of the sympathy of his loved ones as long as he could. While his family supported him, he decided to take up sports to improve his health and fitness. If he had no other choice, he would consider joining the police force or the army. When considering the possibility of his plan succeeding, Donald realized that it would be easier to kill his mother and stepfather than to admit that he had been lying to them for nearly 5 years. In April 2016, the West Virginia Supreme Court released a legal opinion. According to the opinion, Donald was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder 1 month after his arrest in June 2013. Even before the trial, Donald and his legal team sought to delay the trial. A few weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, the defendant, Donald Dunn, who had been held in solitary confinement, underwent surgery on his right hand. His attorneys used the surgery as a reason to request a delay, arguing that during the initial hearings, he would be under the influence of strong painkillers. To decide this issue, the court first requested his medical records. However, this request was denied on the grounds that, at the preliminary hearing, there was no evidence that Donald was partially incapacitated due to the use of painkillers. Therefore, the court determined that he was competent to attend trial and approved the continuation of the scheduled trial. The trial took place in August 2014, over a year after Mark's death. It was presided over by Judge John Hutchinson, with David White representing Donald and Christine Keller from the Raleigh County Prosecutor's Office. Mark's two sisters, along with one of their nieces, traveled more than 15,000 kilometers from Australia to attend the trial of the man they had considered a family member for nearly 20 years. Although there were no details from witness testimony or evidence presented to the jury, and no photographs or video footage, the defense wanted to include in their opening argument that Donald was under the influence of illegal drugs at the time of the crime. However, there was no evidence that this had ever been mentioned before or confirmed by any toxicology tests. On August 14, 2014, Donald Dunn was convicted of the murder of his stepfather, Mark McDermott, the attempted murder of his mother, Johanna McDermott, and the use of a firearm. About a month later, on September 5 of the same year, Judge John Hutchinson sentenced Donald Dunn to life in prison without parole for the murder of his stepfather and 15 years in prison for the attempted murder of his mother. After the verdict was announced, Johanna read an emotional letter to the court. In the letter, Donald's mother mentioned that something unfortunate had happened in her son's life. This could have been due to the decline in health of his grandparents, the pressure she put on him to go to college, or his exposure to violent video games at a very young age. She expressed her disapproval of the way her son was perceived by the public and stated that she did not agree with his sentence. However, Judge John explained that Johanna's objections did not affect his decision. He felt that the sentence he imposed was the only way to restore justice in an unjust situation. He sympathized with the defendant's mother, who, despite the circumstances, wanted to protect her son from the consequences of his actions. After the verdict, Mark's sister and father still could not understand how Donald could take the life of a man who had raised him as his own son for 19 years. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, USA. It was a quiet place where many residents made their living from farming and were very close to one another. Jessica had two younger brothers, Christopher and Michael. From a young age, she helped her parents, Mike and Edna, take care of them while they were at work. This made Jessica more independent, and her parents could always count on her. When she was 15, she started working part-time at a local restaurant, saving money to buy her first car. She dreamed of owning a red Pontiac, and after a few years, she had saved enough money to make this dream come true. Despite her part-time job, Jessica still achieved very good academic results and began planning to go to college to become an accountant. In the fall of 1999, when Jessica was 17, she entered her senior year and started dating a boy, which made her very excited. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, as usual, Jessica's parents went to work while she was still sleeping, and her younger brothers went to the bus stop and then to school. Jessica stayed home and was supposed to drive to school by herself. However, right after her brothers left, around noon, her mother, Edna, returned home and immediately noticed something strange. Jessica's car was parked in front of the house, even though she was supposed to be in class at that time. Edna went to Jessica's room, guessing that she might have overslept and not gone to school. However, Jessica was not in her bedroom. Edna then thought that, for some reason, Jessica might have asked her father, Mike, to drive her to school. She immediately called Mike, but he said he had gone to work alone that morning. Edna suspected that there was a problem with Jessica's car, so she took the spare key to try to start it. However, as she approached the car, she noticed a few disturbing things. The driver's door was slightly open. Jessica's cell phone was on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, and under the front seat were a pair of shoes and her keys. In the back seat were her textbooks, work clothes, and purse. Edna immediately worried that the worst could have happened. It was clear that someone had tried to call 911 from Jessica's phone but couldn't get through. Furthermore, Jessica couldn't have left all her belongings in the car and left unexpectedly. Her family lived in the suburbs, so she would have had to walk several miles. Jessica's parents called the school and learned that she had missed class. However, the school did not notify them as they should have. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the place where they both worked called her parents, saying that Jessica had not shown up for her shift, which made them even more worried. Worried about Jessica's absence from school and work, as well as her belongings, including her phone with the 9 and 1 dial displayed being left in an unlocked car. Her parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff simply assumed that Jessica might have wandered off and would eventually return home. He did not notice that one of her shoes was left in the car, making it difficult for her to travel far without it. Jessica's parents tried to convince the sheriff that their daughter might be in danger, but despite their pleas, he refused to open an investigation, leaving them with no choice but to return home. After that, her parents took it upon themselves to search for her and contact acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. The next day, her parents returned to the sheriff and reported that Jessica had not returned home. This time, the police went to check Jessica's car but found another problem. The officers had searched the car without gloves, touching everything inside with their bare hands. They also did not follow standard procedure for checking Jessica's room. Jessica's parents, once again frustrated with the lack of professionalism from law enforcement, so sought the help of local media to draw attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of concern. Together with relatives and friends, they searched on their own and distributed flyers with information about Jessica. The search was led by Jessica's father and his brother, who were familiar with the area. Fearing the worst, they decided to search near a local river. The area had a bad reputation as it was dense, isolated, and popular with drug dealers and other criminals. For hours, Jessica's relatives searched the difficult terrain along the river but found no trace of her. The next morning, something unusual happened. Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, the boy ran into the house, saying he heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's. Jessica's father immediately grabbed the shotgun and ran outside to find the source of the cry. At the same time, his brother drove up to the house to join the search. Not long after, they noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. When they approached, they saw him burning something on the ground, which looked very suspicious. Jessica's father asked David for permission to search his farm. However, David refused and asked them to leave. It was not just David's strange behavior that was noteworthy. Before Jessica's disappearance, her family had maintained a normal relationship with David and his family. However, after Jessica went missing, David began to act strangely. He often drove slowly past Jessica's family's house and stared at them with a disturbing expression. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from a man who only panted without saying anything. Jessica's family suspected David might have had something to do with their daughter's disappearance, but they could not understand why he was behaving so oddly. Jessica's parents decided to contact the police again, despite having previously failed to get significant attention from the agency. They shared their observations, urged the officers to search David's property with dogs, and agreed to use Jessica's clothes to search for clues. The dogs led them to a fire pit on David's property, but they found no significant evidence. However, they did discover a pair of black gloves in one of the sheds, which indicated the presence of an odor associated with decomposition. Despite David's suspicious behavior, the police were still unable to connect him to Jessica's disappearance, and once again, they came up empty-handed. Frustrated with the local police, Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI. While the FBI typically did not investigate if only based on calls from relatives of missing persons, they decided to get involved immediately due to the disturbing facts presented by Jessica's parents. After a careful investigation, the FBI concluded that something truly terrible might have happened to Jessica. From this point on, a real investigation began, one that the local police had been reluctant to conduct. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seized all potential evidence for analysis, and sent it to the lab. They also organized an extensive ground search using helicopters and gathered volunteers. Additionally, they thoroughly examined the bottom of the pond near Jessica's house, considering the possibility that her body might be there. FBI agents conducted a thorough search of David's farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. After this discovery, detectives were almost certain that David was involved in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, because he acted strangely while police were searching his property. Although investigators did not find enough evidence to arrest the brothers, they focused their efforts on thoroughly searching the area, as it was becoming increasingly likely that Jessica was no longer alive. On September 27, 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call from a woman driving along the road near where Jessica's father had been searching for her. The woman had seen a strange object near a tree on the side of the road and decided to check it out. The woman was shocked to discover it was a body. She immediately called the police. The FBI arrived at the scene and confirmed that the body was that of a young woman who was missing several fingers and toes. She had been bound with a rope that had traces of red and silver paint on her feet, and some of her clothing was also missing, suggesting that she had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the state of decomposition of the body made it difficult to identify the victim. The police went to Jessica's home and asked her parents to assist in the identification process. Jessica's father was unable to look directly at body, but her mother agreed to do so. When she arrived at the scene, Edna initially could not identify her. However, Edna later noticed a small butterfly tattoo on the body that was identical to her daughter's and located in the same spot. Medical professionals later confirmed the deceased's identity as Jessica Dishon and determined that her cause of death was strangulation. Several bruises were also found on her body. The autopsy revealed that she had been alive for about 3 days after her disappearance, as her legs, arms, and fingers were still intact. This indicated that the police had a chance to save her, but they did not take any action to do so. After Jessica's body was discovered, the FBI decided to re-interview David. In the first interview, David claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning she went missing. However, in a subsequent interview, he changed his story, stating that he had not seen her at all that day. He then claimed that he had been home in bed with his wife that morning. When detectives questioned David's wife, she contradicted his account. The FBI continued to question David, asking him what he would do if they found his fingerprints on the victim's body, even though no such evidence was discovered. David's response was suspicious. He said he would have to confess everything in that case. He subsequently failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed with trial. Although no solid evidence linked David to the murder, there were troubling circumstantial signs of his involvement, and the likelihood of a guilty verdict remained relatively low. Investigators continued to seek additional evidence as they prepared for trial. They recalled finding a rope similar to the one used to bind the victim's legs during a search of David's car. However, no DNA was found on it, making it an inconclusive piece of evidence. The trial began in January 2003, and David's attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict his client. During the investigation, authorities discovered several missing body parts of the victim near the scene. They placed the parts in special containers and turned them over to local police, provide the requirement to keep them in a refrigerator. However, they left the containers at room temperature, which caused the parts to decompose quickly. Because the DNA and other evidence against David were not strong enough and the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, he was released. Under state law, he could only be charged again if new evidence was found. For Jessica's parents, this was a devastating blow. They were almost certain that David was the culprit behind their daughter's death. Furthermore, if the police had taken their job more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. Ultimately, they lost all hope for justice. In the years that followed, the case remained unsolved and gradually faded from memory. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. She was assigned to investigate cold cases, initially focusing on the murder of Jessica Dishon. When she reviewed the case files, she was shocked by the negligence of her predecessors. Most of the documents were filled with errors, lacked references to conversations with interested parties, and the evidence was not properly documented. The case had been handled so inefficiently that she had to start the investigation from scratch, although already 13 years after the murder. Lynn's first step was to contact Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now grown and living on his own, gave Lynn a box of Jessica's belongings that had been taken from her car. He had kept it since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn was once again confronted with her colleagues' poor handling of evidence, as it had not been properly stored. Although, after all these years, these items were unlikely to help her, she persisted in examining everything she could find. Through her research, she discovered information about David's medical examination results, which showed that his IQ was only 61, extremely low. This raised concerns about police operations, particularly regarding the questioning of him. Based on his significantly low IQ, he may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. This could indicate that he may not have been involved in the case, as his unusual behavior could be explained by his extremely low IQ. After a thorough investigation of everyone involved or living near the scene, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, a colleague from another department called Lynn and shared new information from an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know the true identity of Jessica's killer. Lynn approached this lead with skepticism because, many times, when inmates try to provide information to the police, the end result is often frustration and wasted time. Many of them make up stories in hopes of getting released early or improving their prison conditions. However, she understood that this lead could not be ignored without verification. She visited the prison and met a man who was said to have relevant information. According to the man, he had shared a cell with a convicted child molester, the same crime as him. They became friends and exchanged details about their crimes. One day, the inmate told him that he had killed Jessica. The informant then revealing the man's name. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle and her father's younger brother. According to the informant, Stanley had confessed that he had sexually abused Jessica for years while they lived in the same household. Stanley had threatened to kill Jessica or her relatives if she spoke out. In the spring of 1999, when Jessica had a boyfriend, Stanley began to fear that she would eventually reveal her abuse by him. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley went to Jessica's home while she was alone. Jessica was getting into her car to leave when Stanley asked her to break up with her boyfriend. Jessica refused and threatened to report him if he did not leave her alone. When he refused, Stanley began to threaten Jessica. She tried to call 911, but Stanley grabbed her. Eventually, Jessica broke free and ran into the house. Stanley chased her down, beat her, then tied her up with bed sheets and took her to a nearby abandoned warehouse, where she was later found dead. Stanley held her captive for a long time, torturing and mentally abusing her before killing her. He then moved her body to a visible location near the road and buried it beneath the warehouse. He also claimed that after the murder, he had dismembered some of her body parts, hoping to deceive the police into thinking it was a drug deal gone wrong. Detective Lynn realized that information about the dismembered body parts had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest friends knew about it, so the informant could not have made this up. Finally, the man added that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Lynn decided to verify all this information by searching for evidence. However, the local police station was short-staffed, so no one there could help her. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives, who agreed to join the search. She didn't tell them that Stanley might be the killer because she wanted to find some evidence to support these shocking accusations first. On the first day, they didn't find any clues in the heavy rain. They dug in areas that matched the description, but to no avail. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn returned to the scene. On the way, he showed her an abandoned shed on the side of the road. They went there and started digging inside, and almost immediately found a significant breakthrough. They discovered a buried bedsheet. Lynn collected this evidence and quickly went to Jessica's house. Over the years, Jessica's room had been kept exactly as it had been when her missing. Thanks to this, Lynn was able to confirm that the bedsheet found was part of Jessica's bedding, as it was not on the bed, and the other linens had the same pattern. Shortly after the evidence was discovered, Stanley was arrested and questioned. Although he appeared very nervous during the interrogation, he still refused to admit to the crime. He was eventually charged with murder, and the case went to trial. Jessica's father, Mike, could not believe that his own brother would commit such a cruel act against his daughter. He went through a period of complete denial but eventually accepted this unbearable truth. He recalled that in the early days of Jessica's disappearance, it was Stanley who suggested searching for the body near the riverbank. However, during the search, he suddenly felt nauseous and was taken home by his brother. It turned out that this incident occurred just a few hundred meters from the warehouse where Jessica lived, suggesting that Stanley had deliberately distracted them from searching for her while she was still alive. During the preparation for the trial, Detective Lynn carefully researched Stanley's past. She discovered that he had a previous conviction for assaulting another girl in the family. In addition, several other women reported that he had sexually abused them when they were children. He often took advantage of his relationship to stay at the victims' homes, then committed the crimes by threatening them not to speak out. The police concluded that he had committed these acts over a period of 3 decades. However, Detective Lynn found that securing a murder conviction would be difficult due to the lack of direct evidence such as fingerprints or DNA. She dug deeper into the case and stumbled upon an old box of files that had not been examined. When she looked through the contents, she was shocked again by the incompetence of those who had originally handled the case. The box contained a letter dated June 26, 2002, in which another informant had written to the police with the same story that Lynn had only heard 12 years later from a Kentucky inmate. In the summer of 2002, Stanley had been convicted of assaulting an underage relative. During that time, he had told a fellow inmate, who happened to be a police informant, about killing Jessica. The fellow inmate had written a letter to the department handling the case, revealing the gruesome details of what Stanley had done to his niece. The police simply ignored the letter and, perhaps believing that David had been involved all those years ago, did not consider other suspects. Lynn was frustrated by the lack of professionalism from her colleagues. Had they paid more attention to their work, the case might have been solved in 2002. For years, Jessica's family could only wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face the justice that had been delayed for his actions. The case began in 2015, and Stanley proclaimed his innocence. In court, Jessica's parents could barely look at the relative who had destroyed their lives. They were also furious that he would not admit to his actions to help them gain closure. The prosecution was concerned that the chances of securing a conviction for murder were slim, mainly due to the lack of substantial evidence. They were also worried about the charges of assault against the other girls in the family, as these witnesses would have to come to court and describe Stanley's behavior toward them in detail. To clarify, the prosecutor negotiated a plea deal with Stanley. Under the terms of the deal, the death penalty would be waived if Stanley pleaded guilty to the assault on his relative and to Jessica's murder. Stanley agreed to the deal, however. Part of the agreement stipulated that he did not have to reveal any further details about the crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy about this, as they wanted to know the whole truth. In the end, Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Stanley was sentenced at the age of 56 and could have been released at the age of 71. After the trial, Jessica's father stated that if his brother hadn't died in prison, he would have waited for him to figure things out for himself. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview and insisted that he did not kill Jessica. He claimed he was on his way to work that morning, but 2 decades later, he couldn't prove it. He could not explain why 2 independent informants had similar stories, including details only the killer would know, such as where the bedsheets were buried. David Brooks stated that police had not ruled out his involvement in the case. Stanley, who knew him, may have asked for his help in disposing of the victim's belongings. Due to his low IQ, Brooks may not have understood the full extent of the situation. It is possible that he burned Jessica's clothes in a fire and that Stanley gave him gloves that had a scent detectable by dogs. However, the truth may never be revealed, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. On the 3rd day after Jessica went missing, her younger brother heard screams outside and thought it was his sister calling for help. However, it is impossible to say for certain what happened at that time. Jessica could still be alive, but Stanley might have kept her in a shed a few miles from her home. In this case, it is more likely that the child imagined the incident due to stress or that someone else was screaming. However, there is another theory, although it seems unlikely. We know that shortly after Jessica's father rushed out, Stanley drove up to the house, which indicates he was nearby. Therefore, it is possible that the girl was in his car with her mouth covered or unconscious. In spite of this hypothesis appears very unlikely,